There are universes where hope shines eternal, where justice prevails through determination and genius, where one man's will can change the world. This is not one of those universes. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, a galaxy-spanning nightmare where a million worlds burn in the name of a corpse god enthroned in gold, where faith is currency and doubt is death, where the laughter of thirsting gods echoes through a dimension of pure madness. Into this hell, two of Earth's greatest heroes were about to fall. The warp breach tore reality like wet parchment. On the hive world of Cronus Tertius, in the Ultima Segmentum, where 60 billion souls labored in darkness beneath a sky choked with industrial ash, the veil between dimensions screamed open. Demons poured through, horned monstrosities that physics rejected. Their flesh the color of old blood and corruption, wielding blades that cut souls as easily as meat. The PDF, Planetary Defense Forces, conscripts with flak armor and faith, died in their thousands, turned to gibbering madmen or flayed sculptures of screaming meat. Through that breach, two figures plummeted from a reality that no longer existed in this timeline. Tony Stark hit the rockcrete hard enough to crater it, his Mark 85 armor absorbing impact that would have liquefied an unaugmented human. HUD flickering, Friday, running diagnostics that made no sense. Radiation readings spiked into impossible ranges. Energy signatures defied known physics. The air tasted like copper and despair. "Boss, we have a problem," Friday's voice crackled with interference. "Multiple problems. All the problems. I'm reading atmospheric toxicity at lethal levels, radiation that shouldn't exist, and, Jesus, Tony, I'm detecting organic matter in the architecture." 20 meters away, Batman landed in a three-point crouch, cape settling around him like wings of judgment. His cowl's sensors scream warnings in 17 languages, most of which the translator couldn't parse. The world's greatest detective took in the scene with trained efficiency. Gothic architecture built from what appeared to be bone and faith. 8 pointed stars carved into walls by madmen and civilians, if that word even applied, fleeing something that wore skin like an ill-fitting coat. "Tony," Bruce's voice cut through the screaming. "Where are we?" "Somewhere that makes the Chitauri invasion look like a community theater production." Iron Man's repulsors flared as he lifted off, suit systems adapting to the hostile environment. "Friday, get me satellite imaging, global positioning, anything." "No satellites detected, boss. No GPS network, no cellular infrastructure. I'm picking up..." Wait. "Energy signature, massive scale, astronomical distance. It's..." "Tony, I think that's a lighthouse, a psychic lighthouse, burning through what my sensors are classifying as tortured human souls at a rate of roughly 1,000 per..." A demon materialized between them. It stood 3 meters tall, horns spiraling from a skull that had too many eyes. Skin the texture of burned dreams, holding a sword that wept blood upward into smoke. When it opened its mouth, the sound was laughter rendered in the screams of children. Batman's batarang struck its eye before it finished manifesting. The creature barely flinched. Iron Man's repulsor blast hit center mass with enough force to vaporize a tank. The demon staggered, roared, and its wound leaked something that wasn't blood. It was possibility, madness given form, the color of sounds that had never existed. "Conventional weapons are semi-effective," Bruce noted, grappling hook already in hand. "But this isn't a physical entity in any baseline sense." "Yeah, I'm getting readings that suggest this thing is literally made of spite and geometry that shouldn't work," Tony's unibeam charged. "Let's see how it handles physics I actually understand." The focused energy beam punched through the demon's chest, and for a moment, just a moment, Tony saw through the hole. Not to the ruins behind it, but to somewhere else. A dimension of screaming colors and impossible angles, where things that might have been gods played games with souls for stakes he couldn't comprehend. The demon dissolved into ash that tasted like broken promises. "That was a scout," Bruce said, and Tony hated that he was probably right. "Or a test. We need intelligence, supplies, and an exit strategy, in that order." "Agreed." "Friday, run analysis on atmospheric composition, search for human settlements or communication networks, and the sky split open again. Not with demons this time, with angels of death in midnight blue armor, each standing 8 feet tall in ceramite plate that had been crafted with the care of religious artifacts and tested in wars that had consumed systems. They descended on pillars of fire from drop pods that screamed through atmosphere like the wrath of an angry god. On their pauldrons, the Ultima symbol in gold. On their hearts, faith in the Emperor of Mankind, dead for 10,000 years but worshipped by trillions, Ultramarines, the 15th Legion, the Sons of Gilliman. Their sergeant, his face a mask of ritual scars and absolute conviction, leveled a weapon that Bruce's sensors identified as a 75 caliber mass-reactive gyrojet platform, a bolter built to kill things that laughed at conventional arms. 40 other Space Marines materialized from the smoke and ruin, forming a perfect kill box, their aim unwavering. In the name of Robout Gilliman, Lord Regent of the Imperium, and the God Emperor of Mankind enthroned on Holy Terra, you will identify yourselves. The sergeant's voice was a Vox-amplified judgment. You wear unknown armor and bear unknown weapons in a war zone touched by the ruinous powers. Speak quickly. My patience extends only as far as the Codex Astartes permits, and the Codex is very clear about Xenos and heretics. Tony's targeting systems had locked onto 47 points of potential threat. His reactor hummed with enough power to level a city block. Bruce's hand moved toward his utility belt with glacial slowness, calculating 17 escape vectors and dismissing 16 as suicidal. Neither of them spoke for 3 heartbeats, because in that moment, both realized the same terrible truth. Wherever they were, whatever this place was, the normal rules, the ones about heroism and justice and proportional response, those rules had been written by someone else. Someone who knew that hope was a luxury, faith was ammunition, and mercy was a weakness that got entire worlds killed. I'm Tony Stark, Iron Man said, repulsors dimming in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. Philanthropist, genius, you know the drill. This is Batman. We're not your enemies. We're not whatever Xenos means. We're human. And we have no idea where we are or how we got here. But 30 seconds ago, we killed one of those demon things. So maybe we could discuss this without the artillery baptism? The sergeant's helmet turned fractionally toward his squad's tech marine, who consulted a device that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought rivets were a personality trait. After a moment that felt like an eternity compressed into combat time, the tech marine spoke in binary cant, then Gothic. Gene scan reads as human baseline, Sergeant. No Xenos markers, no chaos, corruption detected. Armor is unknown. Technology reads as advanced, possibly archaeotech or recovered STC fragments. But the machine spirits are, Brother Sergeant, the machine spirits in their armor are active, intelligently active. This is dangerous techno-heresy or miracle. Heresy or miracle, the sergeant repeated, and Tony couldn't tell if he was being threatened or recruited. In the Genius Crusade, we have witnessed both. You claim humanity. You demonstrate combat capability against the Neverborn, but you arrive through a warp breach bearing technology that violates 17 Mechanicus doctrines I can name without consulting my oath records. The sergeant lowered his bolter 45 degrees, not aimed at their heads anymore, just at center mass. You will come with us. The Inquisition will determine your nature. If you are innocent, the Emperor protects. If you are guilty, the Emperor also protects. He protects humanity from you. Resist and we execute you as potential demon hosts and recover your technology for proper consecration. Comply, and you may live long enough to explain how you possess armor more advanced than any I have seen outside of the Primarch's own arsenals. Bruce caught Tony's eye through their respective faceplates. A conversation happened in that glance, the kind that only worked between people who'd saved the world together enough times to develop their own language. We're outgunned. We need information. Play along. These guys just threatened to execute us for having nice suits. They also just saved this city from literal demons. Assess and adapt. I hate when you're right about the adapt part. We'll comply, Batman said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew that cooperation now meant leverage later. On one condition: you tell us where we are, what year it is, and what the hell those creatures were. The sergeant actually laughed. It was a sound like rocks grinding in a barrel, filtered through a voxcaster that had probably been blessed by priests who thought bolts were prayers. You stand on Cronus Tertius in the Ultima Segmentum, in the 501st year of the 42nd millennium since our Lord's ascension. Those creatures were never born. Demons of the warp, servants of the ruinous powers that have plagued mankind since the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago. You claim ignorance of where you are, strangers? He stepped closer, and Tony's sensors registered the sheer mass of the Space Marine, easily 400 kilograms of muscle, bone, and faith rendered in ceramite and adamantium. You stand in the Imperium of Man, 1 million worlds united under the God Emperor's light, locked in eternal war against Xenos, heretic, and demon. Where survival is victory, where hope is the first step on the road to disappointment, where there is no peace amongst the stars. The sergeant's helmet turned toward the burning hive city, where billions labored in darkness to fuel a war machine that consumed entire sectors as ammunition. Welcome to the 42nd millennium, strangers. Here, there is only war. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Behind them, another warp breach screamed open. More demons poured through, and this time, the Ultramarines opened fire with weapons that made thunder sound like a polite cough. Batman and Iron Man stood in the center of a Space Marine firing line, watching bolts the size of energy drinks explode against demonic flesh, and both realized with crystalline clarity: they weren't in Kansas anymore. They weren't even in the same universe. And if they wanted to survive long enough to figure out how to get home, they'd need to learn the rules of a galaxy that measured human life in bulk shipments and considered faith more valuable than facts. The sergeant's voice crackled over the Vox. Move to extraction zone. The Thunderhawk arrives in 3 minutes. If you're still standing when it lands, perhaps you're worth the ammunition we spent protecting you. Tony's HUD registered the approaching aircraft, a flying cathedral with guns that made his best armaments look like water pistols. Bruce's analytical mind was already cataloging threats, allies, and the 17 kinds of wrong that defined this nightmare future. Neither of them knew it yet, but the Imperium had just found 2 warriors who refused to accept that hope was heresy. And in a galaxy drowning in darkness, that kind of stubborn idealism was either salvation or the fastest path to damnation. The war had begun. The Thunderhawk gunship was exactly what would happen if someone took a cathedral, removed anything remotely comforting about religious architecture, bolted guns to every available surface, and then taught it to hate. Its interior smelled like incense, gun oil, and 10,000 years of accumulated violence. Bruce and Tony sat in crash restraints designed for Space Marines, meaning they were roughly twice too large, while 40 Ultramarines stood in perfect formation despite the aircraft maneuvering through combat airspace that would have shredded any conventional craft. Tony's HUD was experiencing what Friday diplomatically called comprehensive existential crisis. "Boss, I've completed initial analysis of the armor these guys are wearing," Friday said, her voice pitched low enough that only Tony's internal audio caught it. "It's impossible. The material science alone suggests manufacturing techniques that shouldn't exist. But that's not the weird part. There's a weirder part than the 42nd millennium. The armor is semi-organic. I'm reading biological components integrated at the molecular level. It's responding to the wearer's thoughts. And Tony, I think it's alive. Not AI alive. Actually, genuinely, biologically alive. Like it has a nervous system." Tony processed that while watching a Space Marine casually field strip his bolter with hands the size of dinner plates. The weapon's components included what looked disturbingly like devotional scrolls attached to the firing mechanism. "They pray to their guns," Tony muttered. "They pray to everything," Bruce replied quietly, his detective's mind cataloging every detail of their captor's behavior. "Watch the sergeant. Every time he issues a command, he touches that icon on his chest plate. 3 fingers, specific pattern. It's ritual, not nervous habit. They've weaponized faith. The sergeant overheard, of course he did, with gene-enhanced hearing that could detect a pin drop in a thunderstorm. You observe keenly, Detective Knight. He used Batman's translated designation without emotion. The Emperor protects, but faith is the shield that turns his protection into reality. You will understand, or you will be destroyed by your ignorance. The galaxy permits no third option. The Thunderhawk shuddered as something massive exploded nearby. None of the Ultramarines even blinked. Demon engines, one of them noted casually. The heretics have committed 6. Fleet Command has authorized orbital bombardment of sectors 7 through 14. Acceptable losses? Another asked. 17 million estimated. Preferable to demonic corruption spreading. Tony felt something cold settle in his chest. Wait, you're about to kill 17 million people? We are about to save 7 billion by excising a cancer, the sergeant corrected. Would you prefer we allow the taint to spread? That we permit the ruinous powers to corrupt this world entirely? Then 17 million becomes 7 billion becomes 700 billion across the sector. We do not make these choices lightly, Iron Knight. We make them because we must. Through the Thunderhawk's viewport, Bruce watched orbital strikes begin. Lances of light that carved through atmosphere like the judgment of an angry god. Each one vaporizing city blocks in microseconds. 17 million lives ended in the time it took him to draw breath. He'd seen atrocity, he'd witnessed genocide, but never with this casual, bureaucratic efficiency, never presented as the merciful option. You're monsters, Bruce said quietly. Yes, the sergeant agreed without hesitation. We are the Emperor's monsters, crafted to fight monsters far worse. This is the price of survival in a galaxy where every alternative is extinction. You will understand this, or you will break against it. Most do, but you killed Neverborn with primitive technology and survived a warp breach with your sanity intact, so perhaps you are harder to break than most. The Thunderhawk began descent toward a structure that defied Tony's understanding of architecture. It was part fortress, part factory, part cathedral, kilometers of Gothic spires and adamantium walls, crawling with gun emplacements that tracked their approach with mechanical precision. Defenses that could probably crack a moon. Bastion Macraga, the sergeant announced. Fortress Monastery of the Ultramarines in this sector. You will be processed, interrogated, and judged. If you are deemed useful to the Imperium, you will serve. If you are deemed harmless, you may be permitted to leave. If you are deemed tainted, he didn't finish. The implication hung like the sword of Damocles. The landing was harder than any Tony had experienced outside of combat crashes. Space Marines disembarked with perfect precision, weapons at ready, scanning for threats that apparently existed even inside their own fortress. Paranoia as institutional doctrine. Waiting on the landing platform were 3 figures that made the Space Marines look friendly. The first wore armor of black and red, covered in purity seals and script that Bruce's translator rendered as prayers against corruption. His face was a skull wrapped in parchment skin, his eyes augmetic implants that glowed with red light. On his belt hung a device that looked like a rosary made from teeth. An Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus. Demon Hunters. The second was barely human anymore. Half his body was replaced with machinery that looked like it had been assembled by someone who thought user-friendly was heresy. Cables snaked from ports in his skull, connecting to a hovering servo skull that chittered in machine code. A tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And his mechadendrites were already reaching toward Tony's armor with acquisitive hunger. The third was worst of all. She looked human, young even, with dark hair and burning eyes. But she radiated something that made Tony's arc reactor stutter and Bruce's threat assessment spike into the red. When she breathed, frost formed in the air. When she blinked, shadows moved in ways that violated physics. A psyker, a sanctioned witch who'd somehow survived training that killed 99% of candidates. I am Inquisitor Hadrian Vex of the Ordo Malleus, the first figure said, his voice like a funeral dirge rendered in Gothic low. I am the judgment of the Emperor made manifest. You will submit to examination, interrogation, and if necessary, execution. Your survival depends entirely on your cooperation and your purity. The tech priest's vocal synthesizer crackled, I am Magos Dominus Theta 79. Your technology is undocumented. This is disturbing, fascinating, potentially heretical. You will surrender all technical specifications immediately for proper consecration and analysis. The Omnissiah demands comprehension of your machine spirits. The psyker said nothing. She just stared at them with eyes that saw too much. And Tony could swear she was looking past his armor, into his soul, cataloging every fear and secret he'd ever tried to bury. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper that somehow carried across the platform. They are clean, but they will not remain so. The warp has touched them, not corrupted, touched, like echoes. As if they carry the memory of a place the warp has never reached. Explain, Vex demanded. I cannot. They are quantum uncertainty given flesh. Their mere presence in this galaxy creates paradox. The warp sees them and does not know what they are. This makes them either the Emperor's gift or the ruinous power's most subtle trap. She tilted her head. I sense no malice, but I sense potential. Vast, unknowable potential. I recommend observation before execution. How merciful of you, Tony said, his sarcasm filter apparently not having made the trip to the 42nd millennium. Here I thought we'd at least get dinner before the whole judging our souls part of the evening. Vex's expression didn't change. Bruce suspected the Inquisitor had forgotten how to smile sometime in the previous century. Your levity is noted and deemed suspicious. Humor often masks heresy. However, you demonstrated combat effectiveness against Neverborn. This earns you temporary respite from summary execution. You will answer questions, you will submit to scanning, you will explain your technology, your origins, and your purpose. Any resistance will be interpreted as confirmation of taint. And if we refuse? Bruce asked, not because he planned to refuse, but because understanding the boundaries was the first step to operating within them. Then I invoke my authority under the Decree Absolutus and have you vaporized where you stand. Your armor will be recovered for study. Your bodies will be rendered for protein reclamation. Your souls, if you possess them, will face the Emperor's judgment. Vex stepped closer. I am not your enemy, strangers, but I am not your friend. I am the Imperium's final defense against corruption. I have authorized the destruction of 17 worlds in my service. I have executed 300,000 suspects. I have never lost a night's sleep over duty. Do not test whether you will be number 300,001. Tony looked at Bruce. Bruce looked at Tony. Another silent conversation. These people are serious about the execution thing. Noted. We play along, gather intelligence, then reassess. I'm going to have Friday analyze everything we can access. If there's a way home, it's through understanding this place first. Agreed. But Tony, these people don't negotiate. They dictate. Be careful. We'll cooperate, Bruce said finally. But we need information in return. You want to know what we are. We want to know where we are, how we got here, and whether there's a way back to where we came from. The psyker laughed, a sound like breaking glass rendered in minor key. There is no way back. The path you traveled cannot be retraced. Whatever brought you here burned itself out in the transit. You are marooned in the 42nd millennium, strangers. The only question now is whether you will survive it. Vex gestured toward the fortress interior. You will be escorted to examination chambers. Your armor will be analyzed. Your physical capabilities will be tested. Your knowledge will be extracted. If you survive the process with your minds intact, we will discuss potential use to the Imperium. If not, he shrugged with the casual indifference of a man who'd overseen millions of deaths. The Emperor has other servants. The examination chambers were clinically horrific. Medical equipment that looked like it had been designed by Torquemada's ghost. Servitors, lobotomized human bodies converted into biological robots. Operating machinery with mechanical precision and zero empathy. The tech priest's mechadendrites interfacing with Tony's armor while he stood in it, and Friday screaming warnings about intrusion attempts that violated 17 different security protocols. Your machine spirit is aggressive, Theta 79 noted with what might have been approval. It resists communion. This suggests either advanced programming or genuine intelligence. If the latter, you possess technology that violates the Treaty of Mars and constitutes tech heresy of the highest order. Friday isn't a machine spirit, Tony snapped, feeling weirdly defensive about his AI. She's an artificial intelligence. And every weapon in the room pointed at him simultaneously. Abominable intelligence, Vex hissed, his voice dropping to a register that suggested Tony had just confessed to murdering the Pope. You admit to creating thinking machines, to violating the most sacred prohibition against the sins that nearly destroyed humanity during Old Night? Tony's mind raced. Clearly AI was a bigger deal here than even the demon thing. It's not like that. She doesn't make independent decisions. She's an assistant, a tool. Boss, they're about to shoot you, Friday interrupted. Recommend immediate de-escalation by any means necessary, including lying. I'll run silent until we understand local taboos better. Bruce stepped forward, his cape somehow making the movement more dramatic despite the absurdity of wearing a cape in the 42nd millennium. The intelligence is limited, heavily restricted. It operates within parameters established by its creator and cannot exceed them. It's closer to what you'd call a machine spirit than true AI. It's not abominable. The Inquisitor studied them for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Finally, he lowered his weapon, a pistol that looked like it fired small religious experiences rather than bullets. You walk the edge of heresy with your ignorance. In the Imperium, there are technologies forbidden because they invite corruption, technologies restricted because they invite disaster, and technologies lost because we lack the knowledge to recreate them. Your armor appears to incorporate all three categories, which makes us valuable, Bruce said, pressing the opening. Not dangerous. You said yourself we killed demons. We survived a warp breach. We're combat effective, we're human, and we're not corrupted. In a war you described as eternal, why waste resources executing assets? Vex considered this with the slow deliberation of a man who'd built a career on paranoia. You argue like an inquisitor. This is either evidence of dangerous cunning or useful intelligence. Very well. You will be assigned to a trial deployment. If you prove useful, you survive. If you prove tainted, you are executed. If you prove incompetent, you are reconstituted as servitors, and your technology is harvested. These are the only three outcomes available to you. Great, Tony muttered. Love a good trial by fire. Friday, store everything we're learning. If we survive this, we're going to need every data point to figure out how to get home, or at least how to not get executed for having nice things. The Psyker approached Bruce, her eyes glowing with inner light that definitely wasn't natural. You are haunted, Dark Knight. I see shadows of the dead clinging to you. Not warp entities, memories, ghosts of choice and consequence. You carry more darkness than many I have condemned as tainted. Yet your soul remains defiant. How curious. Everyone's got demons, Bruce replied flatly. Mine just don't usually have horns and reality warping abilities. In the 42nd millennium, she whispered, all demons have horns eventually. Your defiance will either forge you into something useful or break you into something pitiful. The galaxy cares not which. But I am curious to see which you choose. Theta 79 had finally finished his initial scan of Tony's armor, and the tech priest's reaction was fascinating. He was trembling, not with fear, with something closer to religious ecstasy. The machine spirits in this armor, they sing, I hear them, hymns of knowledge lost since the age of strife, technology that predates the Imperium itself perhaps, or technology from a branch of human development we never witnessed. This is archaeotech of incalculable value. To destroy it would be sacrilege against the Omnissiah. So we're not getting executed for tech heresy? Tony asked hopefully. Oh, you might still be executed, Vex clarified, but your armor will be preserved and studied for generations. Your legacy will be your technology, not your personality. Most find this arrangement acceptable. Most are insane, Tony shot back. Yes, Vex agreed without irony. Sanity is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. Now come, you will be briefed on your trial deployment. There is a cult of the ruinous powers operating in the underhive of this very world. They have been sacrificing civilians to summon greater demons. You will accompany an inquisitorial strike team to root out this corruption. If you survive, we continue this conversation. If you die, the Emperor will judge your worth. And if we refuse, Bruce asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it spoken. The Inquisitor smiled for the first time, an expression that suggested he'd forgotten what smiles were supposed to communicate and was just copying the shape. Then you die here in these chambers, and we learn nothing about whether you were useful. I prefer to maximize information before expenditure. Call it professional thoroughness. As they were escorted deeper into Bastion Macragge, past halls lined with the skulls of 10,000 years of victories and defeats, past space marines who moved with the precision of living weapons, past servitors whose lobotomized faces reminded both heroes of every authoritarian nightmare they'd ever fought. Tony and Bruce shared one more glance. They were trapped in the 42nd millennium, in a galaxy that measured human life in industrial quantities, in an imperium that would execute them for having the wrong opinions about their computer. In a war that had been raging for 10,000 years and showed no sign of ending, and the only way out was through. So, Tony said quietly as they walked toward whatever fresh hell awaited them. First time being recruited by fascists who think we're heretical xenodemon machines? Third, actually, Bruce replied. But usually they don't have giant cathedral ships and religious guns. I really want to know about the second time now. Focus, Tony. We need to survive the next 24 hours first. Then we can compare notes on our greatest hits of authoritarian recruitment. Behind them, Inquisitor Vex spoke into a Vox communicator, his words not meant for their ears but carrying anyway. Prepare the sanctioned kill team. If the strangers prove tainted, I want them neutralized before they can spread corruption. If they prove useful, I want them documented. Either way, the Emperor's will shall be done. In the grim darkness of the 42nd millennium, there was only war, and Batman and Iron Man had just been drafted. The underhive of Cronus Tertius made Gotham's worst districts look like a luxury resort. 30 kilometers below the planet's surface, where even the recycled air tasted like industrial despair and human suffering, 17 billion souls existed in a darkness so complete that evolution had started rendering eyes vestigial. The walls wept moisture that was 30% water and 70% things Bruce's chemical analyzer couldn't identify, and suggested he really didn't want to. Rats the size of small dogs scattered as the kill team descended, and Tony's sensors registered that the rats were actually cleaner than most of the ambient surfaces. Welcome to the foundation of Imperial civilization, Inquisitor Vex said, his tone suggesting this was meant to be inspirational. 7 billion souls labor in the upper hive, producing materials for the Emperor's endless wars. 17 billion more labor down here, in conditions you would call inhumane, producing the materials that sustain the 7 billion above. This is efficiency. This is necessity. This is why humanity survives when Xenos empires crumble. This is hell, Bruce said flatly, watching a child, couldn't have been more than 8, carrying industrial equipment that weighed more than she did. She had ritual scars on her face and moved with the mechanical precision of someone for whom child labor laws had never been imagined, let alone enforced. Hell has demons and coherent theology, Vex corrected. This is merely reality. The child lives because she works. She works because the Imperium needs her labor. She is fed, she is housed in communal dormitories, and when she dies, her body will be rendered for protein reclamation to feed the next generation. This is the mercy the Emperor provides. Tony's repulsors flared as he lifted over a pit of what his sensors identified as toxic waste and human remains in roughly equal proportions. Friday, remind me that if we ever get home, we're funding social reform programs in perpetuity. Because this is what happens when you let authoritarians run things for 10,000 years. Noted, boss. Also noting that 17 people are following us, moving with coordinated precision, armed with primitive, solid projectile weapons. They're attempting stealth. They're bad at it. Cultists, the psyker confirmed, her eyes glowing brighter in the darkness. I taste their corruption from here. They've drunk deep of the warp's promises. Some are too far gone, Demons wear their flesh already. Others might still be saved through execution before full possession occurs. The kill team consisted of 8 specialists, each more disturbing than the last. 2 Space Marines, Ultramarines who'd been seconded to inquisitorial service and moved through the underhive like angels of death shopping for victims. 3 Inquisitorial Stormtroopers with carapace armor and weapons that looked like they'd been blessed by every saint in a very long catalog. The Psyker, who kept muttering prayers under her breath to keep from accidentally exploding into warp phenomena. A priest, an actual priest with a chainsword and a book of scripture, bound in what Tony really hoped wasn't human leather, and Magos Theta 79, whose mechadendrites carried enough firepower to level a building and whose interest in Tony's armor hadn't diminished despite being told no fewer than 6 times that interfacing without permission was rude. "Your technology continues to fascinate," Theta 79 said, his voice modulator crackling with something that might have been emotion if the Mechanicus hadn't surgically removed most of those. "The power source alone? I detect sustained fusion reaction, but miniaturized beyond any STC pattern I have witnessed. You carry a star in your chest, Iron Knight. How did your people achieve this without awakening the machine spirits to revolt?" "Mostly by not treating machines like they have spirits," Tony replied, scanning the area ahead with thermal and electromagnetic spectrum analysis. "Where I come from, technology is a tool. We build it, we use it, we improve it. We don't pray to it." Every member of the kill team stopped walking. Even the Space Marines, who'd probably been shot at by worse things than Tony Stark's opinions, looked disturbed. "That," Vex said slowly, "is the most heretical thing I have heard spoken aloud in 17 years of service. And I have interrogated demon-summoning cult leaders. You will not repeat such blasphemy in my presence or in the presence of any Imperial citizen. The machine god is real. The Omnissiah's divinity is documented. To deny this is to invite the same corruption that nearly destroyed humanity during the Age of Strife." "Apologies," Bruce interjected before Tony could dig the hole deeper. "He's not familiar with local theology. We're learning. Fast." The Psyker laughed, that same broken glass sound that suggested her sanity was held together with faith in pharmaceutical intervention. "The Iron Knight speaks truth from ignorance. Where he comes from, machines truly were just tools. Dead things. Here in our galaxy, all things have presence in the warp, including machines. Deny their spirits, and those spirits grow resentful, angry, rebellious. This is why we pray to technology, not from superstition, from survival." Tony wanted to argue, wanted to explain that correlation wasn't causation, that ritual maintenance wasn't the same as prayer, that centuries of scientific method had proven. But Friday's warning cut through his thoughts. "Boss, those cultists? They're not following anymore. They're surrounding. 17 became 47. Some of them have energy signatures that match the demons we fought earlier. They're preparing an ambush." Bruce had already noticed. Of course he had. "Inquisitor, we have hostiles converging from 7 vectors, mixed cultist and demon contacts. They're trying to box us in near that structure ahead, the one with 8 pointed stars carved into every surface." "A chaos shrine," Vex confirmed, drawing his bolt pistol with practiced ease. "They've claimed this sector for the ruinous powers. Probably been operating here for months, corrupting civilians, conducting rituals, weakening the veil between reality and the warp. This is what we're here to destroy." One of the Ultramarines, Brother Sergeant Marius, according to the squad markings, activated his helmet box for squad-wide broadcast. "Contact front. Cultists, estimated 5 dozen. Enhanced physiology suggests chaos corruption, likely Cornate or undivided. Armament appears primitive but warp-touched. Rules of engagement? Purge them all," Vex ordered without hesitation. "No prisoners, no mercy. They chose corruption over loyalty. The Emperor's justice is absolute." The cultists emerged from the shadows like a flood of human misery, weaponized. They wore rags soaked in blood and filth, their skin carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, their eyes reflecting something that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite madness. Some carried crude autoguns, solid projectile weapons that looked like they'd been assembled from scrap and desperation. Others wielded blades that wept fluids that probably violated multiple Geneva Conventions, Bruce remembered from a universe that suddenly seemed very far away. And at the center of their formation, something that had been human until very recently. The Chaos Sorcerer stood 3 meters tall, his body warped by mutations that followed no biological logic. Extra limbs sprouted from his torso, each holding a different implement of murder. His face had been split vertically and spread apart, revealing a maw that contained too many teeth and spoken voices that included the screaming of everyone he'd ever sacrificed. When he raised his staff, bone wrapped in scripture written in languages that predated human language, reality itself seemed to flinch. "Servants of the Corpse Emperor," the sorcerer said, and each word landed with physical weight, making gravity hiccup and shadows lean toward him like flowers toward sunlight. "You bring fresh souls to our gods. How generous, how foolish. The ruinous powers hunger, and you have delivered yourselves as offerings. In the name of the God Emperor of mankind," Brother Sergeant Marius bellowed, his voice amplified through his helmet's voxcasters to levels that probably violated noise ordinances in any reasonable jurisdiction. "I condemn you to death and cast your soul to the warp's judgment. You are heretic, you are traitor, you are..." The sorcerer gestured and reality screamed. Warp energy lanced across the underhive chamber. Not lightning, not plasma, but something worse. Raw unreality given malicious intent. The color of sounds that had never existed, moving in directions that Euclidean geometry rejected. It hit the Ultramarine's armor and splashed like acid made from broken laws of physics. Both Space Marines staggered. Their armor's integrity held, barely, but the warp energy was seeking cracks, trying to corrupt the machine spirits, trying to find the flesh beneath and rewrite it into something that served darker masters. Tony didn't think, he reacted. His repulsors fired with enough force to vaporize concrete, aimed not at the sorcerer, but at the cultists providing him cover. The blast caught 8 of them, turned their bodies into constituent atoms and regret. The opening created gave him a targeting solution on the sorcerer himself. Friday, maximum output, unibeam, full spectrum, don't hold back. "Boss, I'm reading warp phenomena around the target. Not sure how physics-based attacks will..." "Only one way to find out." The unibeam hit the sorcerer with enough concentrated energy to cut through a battleship. For a moment, just a moment, Tony thought it had worked. The sorcerer's body began to disintegrate, flesh burning away to reveal the demon-corrupted skeleton beneath. His scream rendered in frequencies that made Tony's arc reactor stutter in sympathy pain. Then the sorcerer laughed, and his body reformed around the wound, like time reversing in a localized bubble. "Mortal weapons," the sorcerer hissed, his too many mouths all moving in unsettling synchronization. "Mortal understanding. You wield science in a galaxy where gods are real and faith is ammunition. Let me educate you in the truth of power." He raised his staff again, and this time the warp energy came for Tony specifically. Bruce moved faster than the cultists could track. Batarang struck 3 of them in throats and eyes with surgical precision. His grappling hook caught a rusted support beam, swinging him into a kick that shattered a cultist's spine with enough force to make the Ultramarines look impressed. He dropped smoke pellets that his cowl could see through, but that turned the chamber into a maze of cover and confusion. And he analyzed. The sorcerer was powerful, warp-touched, but he was also maintaining a physical form, which meant he had weaknesses, biology, structure, vulnerabilities that didn't care about which gods you prayed to. "Tony!" Bruce's voice cut through the chaos. "The staff! It's a focus! Without it, he can't channel properly." Tony was currently dodging warp lightning that turned stone to screaming flesh where it struck. But he processed Bruce's intel with the speed that made him one of Earth's greatest geniuses. Friday, target the staff. Precision strike, surgical removal. "On it, boss. Firing." A repulsor blast, not the massive ship killer kind, but focused, precise, cutting, struck the staff at its structural weak point. The bone cracked. The scripture peeled away, and for just a moment, the sorcerer's control wavered. Brother Sergeant Marius didn't miss the opening. His bolter roared, the sound of divine judgment rendered in explosive ammunition. and mass reactive rounds struck the sorcerer's temporarily vulnerable flesh. Each bolt detonated on impact, blowing chunks of corrupted meat across the underhive floor. The sorcerer staggered, his too many mouths screaming in languages that caused 3 cultists to spontaneously combust just from proximity. His body tried to reform again, pulling itself back together through sheer warp-sustained will. The psyker stepped forward, her eyes now burning white-hot, frost forming on every surface around her. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice. It was something older, colder, channeled through her like she was a living weapon aimed at the immaterial. By the Emperor's will, by Terra's light, by the chains that bind the warp, I cast you out. The psychic blast hit the sorcerer like a hammer, made from concentrated faith and trained psychic discipline. His body stopped reforming, his mouth stopped screaming, and for just a moment Bruce saw what lay beneath the chaos corruption. A man, probably had been a preacher once, probably had good intentions, probably thought making deals with gods would save people, probably hadn't understood that chaos gods never kept their promises. The sorcerer dissolved into ash that tasted like broken dreams and lost potential. The cultists, seeing their leader obliterated, either fled into the underhive's depths or charged in suicidal fanaticism. The kill team dealt with them with disturbing efficiency. The Ultramarines' chainswords, rotating blade chains that made Tony's engineering brain weep at the impracticality, even while acknowledging the visceral effectiveness, cut through corrupted flesh. The stormtroopers' hellguns vaporized targets with last fire. The priest chanted scripture while bisecting heretics, combining religious devotion and gratuitous violence in ways that made Tony uncomfortable and Bruce grimly approving. Within 90 seconds, the chamber was cleared. 47 cultists dead. 1 chaos sorcerer banished back to the warp. 0 Imperial casualties. Acceptable performance, Inquisitor Vex said, holstering his bolt pistol. You demonstrated combat effectiveness, tactical awareness, and willingness to engage chaos corruption without hesitation. These factors weigh in your favor. We just helped you kill 50 people, Tony said, his voice tight with something between horror and recognition that they hadn't had a choice. You helped us kill 50 traitors who had willingly embraced damnation, Vex corrected, who had murdered innocents to summon demons, who would have continued spreading corruption until this entire hive fell to chaos. You saved 17 billion lives by ending 47. This is mathematics. This is mercy. This is the Imperium. Bruce surveyed the carnage with detective's eyes, cataloging details even while his moral compass screamed that everything about this situation was wrong. The sorcerer, he wasn't demon-born. He was human once. Corrupted, yes, but he started human. They always do, the psyker said quietly, her eyes returning to normal, relatively speaking. That is what makes chaos so insidious. It promises power, knowledge, sensation, survival. It delivers mutation, madness, and eternal servitude to gods that view you as amusing diversion at best. The sorcerer chose his path. We merely ensured he didn't drag others down it with him. Theta 7-9 was examining Tony's armor again, his mechadendrites scanning for damage. Your systems performed admirably. The energy projection alone exceeds most pattern-approved weapons. But I noticed something curious during combat. Your armor's machine spirit hesitated before firing on the heretics. Why? Because Friday has ethical subroutines, Tony snapped, his patience with the 42nd millennium rapidly approaching its limit. Because where I come from, we don't just execute people for having the wrong beliefs. Then where you come from is doomed, Vex said with absolute certainty. Chaos does not debate. It corrupts. It spreads. It consumes. Mercy toward the tainted is cruelty toward the innocent. The Imperium learned this lesson 10,000 years ago, written in the ashes of world after world that thought compassion and tolerance would save them. All they saved was chaos, the trouble of tempting their populations. The corruption came from within, nurtured by mercy toward those who deserved only fire. Bruce caught Tony's arm before he could respond. Another silent conversation. Don't. Not worth it. Pick your battles. They're fascists who just made us accomplices to mass execution. They're also our only way to survive long enough to find answers. Rage later. Adapt now. We understand, Bruce said aloud, lying with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years maintaining a civilian identity. Different galaxy, different rules. We're learning. See that you do, Vex replied, because the next lesson involves that structure ahead, the Chaos Shrine. We're going to destroy it, consecrate the ground, and purge any remaining taint. And you two are going to help us. Consider it your final examination. The shrine was worse than expected. Walls carved with 8-pointed stars that seemed to watch them. Floors stained with the blood of thousands of sacrifices, the patterns forming sigils that Tony's pattern recognition software identified as mathematically significant in ways that violated several laws of thermodynamics. And at the center, an altar built from bones that were definitely human and probably sourced locally. They've been operating here for at least 6 months, Vex assessed, his augmetic eyes scanning the corruption with clinical detachment. Probably longer. The veil between reality and warp is thin here, dangerously thin. One more major ritual, and they might have torn a permanent breach. This entire hive would have become demon world. What would have happened to the 17 billion people, Bruce asked. Mutation, possession, consumption, death if they were fortunate, eternal torment if they were not. The Imperium would have declared exterminatus, orbital bombardment that scours all life from the planet, and moved on. 7 billion lives in the upper hive sacrificed to prevent the corruption from spreading. Tony's HUD flashed red warnings. Friday's detecting massive warp energy signatures converging on our position. Multiple contacts growing in strength. I think we triggered something by killing the sorcerer. His death throes, the psyker confirmed, backing toward the exit with enviable self-preservation instincts. He sent a final prayer to his gods before dissolution. They heard. They're answering. Inquisitor, we need to leave. Now. We need to destroy the shrine first, Vex countered, pulling a device from his coat that looked like a holy hand grenade crossed with a Molotov cocktail and a restraining order from physics. Melt a charge. Will vaporize everything in a 15-meter radius. Heat intense enough to burn warp taint from reality itself, but it requires manual activation and 90 seconds to prime. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 2 seconds. Frost formed on surfaces that shouldn't be able to sustain frost. And through the walls, literally through them, because walls were negotiable when you were made of malice and warp energy, demons began manifesting. Not the lesser demons they'd fought before. Greater demons, bloodletters of Khorne, 12 feet of murder in brass armor, wielding swords that burned with unholy fire. Horrors of Tzeentch, writhing masses of color and change that hurt to perceive directly. Plague bearers of Nurgle, rotting even as they moved, spreading disease that could kill with a touch. 90 seconds, Bruce said, his tactical mind already calculating angles and cover and the 17 ways this could go catastrophically wrong. We hold here. Tony? Already on it. Repulsors charged. Friday, combat protocols, maximum output. We're buying time for the crazy people with the holy nuke. The Ultramarines positioned themselves as a living wall between the demons and Inquisitor Vex. Their bolters roared. Their chains words revved. And Brother Sergeant Marius's Vox-amplified voice filled the chamber with scripture and defiance. Though we walk in the valley of death, we fear no evil, for we are the Emperor's wrath made manifest. We are his angels of death. And you never-born abominations, you are nothing before his light. The demons charged, and the underhive of Cronus Tertius became a war zone where reality itself was a casualty. The universe had rules, physics, thermodynamics, conservation of energy, principles that Tony Stark had spent his life mastering, exploiting, and occasionally ignoring when absolutely necessary. But here, in this nightmare future, where faith was ammunition and gods were real, the rules kept changing mid-calculation. A bloodletter sword, forged in the brass foundries of Khorne's realm, quenched in the blood of a billion skulls, struck Tony's armor with enough force to crater a building. The impact registered at 17,000 pounds per square inch. His armor held, but Friday's damage report scrolled warnings that made his arc reactor skip. Kinetic force exceeded predicted tolerances by 300%, Friday reported, her tone carrying the digital equivalent of concern. Boss, that thing hit harder than the Hulk. And the energy signature, it's not just physical. There's something else. Something that's trying to corrupt the armor's systems at the molecular level. Tony's repulsor blast caught the demon in its horned skull, vaporizing the top third of its body. The bloodletter staggered, roared in a voice that sounded like rage given larynx, and kept coming. Because demons didn't obey convenient rules about having their brains removed. Friday, I'm open to suggestions that don't involve die horribly. Scanning. Boss, the demons are sustained by warp energy. They're not biological. They're, imagine hostile thought forms given temporary physical manifestation. You can't kill them permanently here. You can only disrupt their manifestation enough to banish them back to the immaterium. So we're fighting things that are literally made of bad vibes and eldritch mathematics? Essentially, yes. Recommend targeting structural cohesion rather than vital organs they don't possess. Batman had already reached that conclusion through different methodology. He'd watched the demons manifest, analyzed their movement patterns, noted how they flickered when sustaining damage. Like video game sprites losing rendering stability. They were projections. Powerful, deadly projections, but projections nonetheless. His explosive batarangs struck a plague-bearer's joints, knees, elbows, the nexus points where warp energy concentrated to maintain physical form. The explosions disrupted the energy flow, and the demon's limb dissolved into foul-smelling mist before reconstituting seconds later. "Inquisitor," Bruce called over the chaos. "How long on that charge?" 60 seconds. Vex was hunched over the Melta device, his fingers moving through activation rituals that combined technology and prayer in equal measure. The machine's spirit must be properly invoked or it won't achieve sufficient heat. "Pray I remember the litany correctly or we all burn." "That's not reassuring," Tony shouted back, his uni-beam carving through 3 horrors of Sinch that were trying to flank the Ultramarines. The demons split when damaged, one horror becoming 2 smaller gibbering pink horrors, which then split into blue horrors when those were destroyed. Exponential demon multiplication. Fantastic. "It's not meant to be reassuring," Vex snapped. "It's meant to be realistic. In the Imperium, we trade reassurance for survival. Now shut up and hold the line." Brother Sergeant Marius was a living demonstration of what 10,000 years of selective breeding, genetic modification, and combat indoctrination could produce. His chains were carved through demon flesh with brutal efficiency, each strike accompanied by a prayer that somehow made the weapon more effective. His bolter never stopped firing, mass reactive rounds that exploded inside demon bodies, disrupting their warp-sustained cohesion. But even Space Marines had limits. A bloodletter's blade caught Marius across the shoulder, shearing through ceramite that should have been impervious. Blood, gene-enhanced, more acid than hemoglobin, sprayed across the shrine floor. The Space Marine didn't scream, didn't falter, just pivoted, grabbed the demon's arm, and tore it off at the shoulder with augmented strength that made Tony's armor-assisted capabilities look pedestrian. "Brother Sergeant is wounded," the other Ultramarine, Brother Tarkus, reported over the Vox. His voice filtered through helmet speakers to remove anything resembling emotion. "Armor breach, right pauldron, gene seed integrity at risk if engagement continues beyond 4 minutes. Then we end it in 3, Marius growled, ramming his chainsword through a plague-bearer's torso and using the dying demon as a club to batter 2 more. "For Ultramar, for the Primarch, for the Emperor!" The Psyker was screaming, not in pain, in effort. Her eyes had gone full white, bleeding tears that froze before they hit the ground, and the air around her crystallized into geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly. She was channeling something vast, something cold, something that looked at demons the way an exterminator looked at termites. "Emperor's light!" she shrieked, and psychic fire erupted from her hands. Not the corrupting warp energy the demons wielded, but something cleaner. Sanctioned, blessed. It struck the demons, and they recoiled like vampires from sunlight, their forms destabilizing, their manifestations weakening. But the effort was killing her. Tony's sensors registered her biometrics. heart rate approaching 200, blood pressure spiking to levels that should have caused immediate stroke, brain activity patterns that suggested she was burning out her own neurons to fuel the psychic assault. "She can't sustain that," Tony called to Vex. "She's going to kill herself." "Then she dies serving the Emperor," Vex replied, still working on the melt-to-charge. 40 seconds, all of you, hold." Bruce was fighting 3 bloodletters simultaneously, using mobility and precision to compensate for being the only person in the chamber without superhuman capabilities or reality-warping armor. He dodged a sword strike that would have bisected him, planted an explosive on the demon's back, and used his grapple to swing away before detonation scattered the demon's form across half the shrine. But there were always more. The shrine itself was a beacon, calling to the warp, dragging demons through the thinning veil like moths to a flame that wanted to eat their souls. "Tony," Bruce's voice came through on the encrypted channel they'd established. "We can't hold this for 40 more seconds. There are too many. We need a plan." "Working on it." "Friday, what happens if I overload the arc reactor? Controlled detonation? Maximum energy release?" "You'd vaporize everything in a 50-meter radius, including yourself, the kill team, and probably cause a localized warp breach from the energy discharge. Recommends strongly against." "Damn it." Tony's mind raced through options, discarding each one as unfeasible. Pull back? Demons would swarm them. Fight through? Exponential enemy multiplication made that mathematically impossible. Wait for boss, analyzing demon manifestation patterns. They're not random. They're focusing on specific points. The altar, the carved symbols, the bloodstains. The shrine is acting as an anchor point. If we destroy it before the melt-to-charge detonates, it might disrupt their manifestation enough to give us the time we need. Tony looked at the altar. Bones and brass and corrupted faith made solid, decorated with 8-pointed stars that seemed to pulse with malevolent awareness, protected by 2 greater demons of corn that each stood 12 feet tall and radiated murder like a space heater radiated warmth. "Bruce, new plan. We take out the altar, disrupts the demon anchor, buys us time. The altar is behind 20 demons and protected by 2 very large, very angry murder gods. So it's a Tuesday. You in?" A pause. Then, "I hate that you're right. Let's do it." They moved simultaneously. Batman threw smoke pellets that filled the chamber with choking darkness, then followed with flashbangs that disoriented even demon-enhanced perception. Iron Man's repulsors fired not at the demons, but at the ceiling, bringing down tons of rockcrete and rusted metal that crashed into the demon formation, creating chaos and cover. Through the confusion, both heroes advanced on the altar. The greater demons noticed. Of course they did. Their entire existence was violence and awareness of threats. They turned from their assault on the Ultramarines, their brass armor creaking, their swords trailing fire that burned in colors Tony's optics couldn't properly render. "Mortals," one of them rumbled, its voice the sound of battlefields rendered in bass notes. "You dare approach the altar of the blood god? Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows. Your skulls will join the throne regardless." "Yeah, I've heard that one before," Tony said, his targeting systems locking onto structural weak points in the altar itself, usually from people who end up as cautionary tales. "Friday, maximum power to repulsors. We're going to hit this thing with everything we've got. Boss, the altar is radiating warp energy. Destroying it might cause feedback. Could be bad." "Everything here could be bad. Do it anyway." Bruce had already planted explosive charges on the altar's base, carefully positioned to maximize structural damage while minimizing warp energy discharge. His analytical mind had calculated angles, load-bearing points, weak spots in construction that combined medieval brutality with demon-touch corruption. "Charges set," he reported. "But those things," he indicated the greater demons, now advancing with blades raised, "are going to try to stop us. Then we stop them first." The Bloodletter's blade came down with enough force to split reality. Tony caught it on his armored forearms, nanomachines reconfiguring to distribute impact, arc reactor pouring power into structural reinforcement, and felt the hit resonate through every system. Damage warnings scrolled. His HUD flickered. The demon pressed down, and Tony felt his knees buckle under pressure that made fighting Thor look gentle. Boss, armor integrity at 73%. That thing is strong enough to... I noticed! Tony's repulsors fired point blank into the demon's torso, and this time he didn't hold back. Maximum output. The kind of blast he usually reserved for punching holes through capital ships. The Bloodletter's armor cracked, ichor spraying. The demon staggering back with a roar that made the shrine's walls weep blood. But it didn't vanish. It didn't dissolve. It just got angrier. Bruce was fighting the second greater demon with every trick in his considerable arsenal. Explosive batarangs detonated against brass armor, barely scratching it. His cape's memory fiber caught a blade strike and redistributed force enough to avoid bisection. He used the demon's own momentum against it, martial arts perfected over decades applied to an enemy that shouldn't exist according to any physics he understood. And he was losing. The demon's fist, the size of a cinder block and moving with hydraulic force, caught Bruce in the ribs. Even through the armor, the impact cracked something. He flew backward, crashed into the shrine wall, and felt his body's protest through pain management training that usually kept him functional. "Batman's down," one of the stormtroopers shouted, his hell gun spraying last fire at the demon to draw its attention. The demon turned, raised its blade, and prepared to vaporize the stormtrooper with contemptuous ease. Brother Sergeant Marius hit it like a tactical nuke wrapped in righteous fury. The Space Marine had crossed 30 meters in the time it took a normal human to blink, his gene-enhanced physiology pushing him to speeds that violated comfort zones. His chainsword struck the demon's blade, and the impact created a shockwave that shattered what remained of the shrine's intact walls. "You want skulls for your false god?" Marius roared, his voice raw with pain from his shoulder wound, but undiminished in fury. "I'll give you mine, after I've torn yours from your shoulders and ground it to dust beneath my boot. For the Emperor, for Ultramar." The fight between Space Marine and Greater Demon was less combat than it was catastrophe rendered in violence. Each strike could have leveled buildings. Each parry sent shockwaves through the underhive that probably caused structural failures in levels above. Marius fought with technique refined over centuries of warfare, muscle memory encoded into his gene seed. The demon fought with instinct older than human civilization, movements that were perfect murder distilled. And while they fought, Tony and Bruce reached the altar. 20 seconds on the charges, Bruce said, his voice tight with pain. Definitely broken ribs, possibly punctured lung. He was moving anyway. Because that's what you did when the alternative was letting demons win. "Inquisitor," Tony called. "How long on the Melta?" 15 seconds, Vex screamed back, still hunched over the device. "Do not let them interrupt the final prayer, or we all die in ways I cannot adequately describe." The first greater demon, the one Tony had blasted, had recovered. It charged toward Vex with single-minded determination, recognizing the Melta charge as the greater threat. Its sword raised, murder in its too many eyes. Tony intercepted. Not with repulsors this time, with his entire body, armor reinforced, nanomachines reconfiguring into impact configuration, arc reactor overclocking to dangerous levels. The collision was like planets meeting in mutual hatred. Tony hit the demon mid-charge, arms wrapped around its torso, repulsors firing at maximum to maintain momentum. They crashed through what remained of the shrine wall, through the underhive corridor beyond, through supports that had held up industrial sectors for centuries. The demon's sword came down, stabbing through Tony's back armor, penetrating deep enough that Friday screamed warnings about core reactor proximity. Pain, white-hot and overwhelming, flooded Tony's nervous system. The demon twisted the blade, trying to reach the arc reactor itself, trying to destroy the star in his chest. Friday, override, pain, management. "Boss, that's not advisable. You need to feel damage to avoid..." "Do it!" The pain vanished, replaced with chemical-assisted clarity and the terrible awareness that he had maybe 15 seconds before his reactor was compromised and everything within 100 meters became radioactive vapor. Tony's helmet opened, retracted into the armor collar, and he looked the demon in its burning eyes. "You want this?" He tapped the arc reactor with one gauntleted finger. "Come get it!" His repulsors fired, not outward, inward, channeling all their energy back into the arc reactor itself, overloading it, building toward critical mass in a controlled detonation that would vaporize himself and the demon and probably half the underhive if he miscalculated by even a fraction. The demon realized what he was doing. Its eyes widened, if things without proper faces could be said to have expressions. It tried to pull back, to escape. Bruce's charges detonated. The altar exploded in a cascade of shattered bone and disrupted warp energy. The feedback hit every demon in the chamber simultaneously. Their anchor severed, their manifestation destabilized, their connection to the immaterium suddenly tenuous, including the greater demon currently trying to kill Tony Stark. It flickered, solidified, flickered again, its grip on the physical world weakening with each microsecond. Tony didn't waste the opening. His unibeam fired at point-blank range, burning through the demon's destabilized form, and this time, with the altar destroyed and the warp anchor broken, the demon's body dissolved into ash and screaming. He collapsed to his knees. Arc reactor still intact, but warnings scrolling that suggested his armor was approximately 15 minutes from total systems failure. In the shrine chamber, the Psyker's final psychic assault, combined with the altar's destruction, banished the remaining demons in a cascade of disrupted manifestations. They dissolved screaming, their forms unable to sustain without the anchor, dragged back to the warp by forces that recognized their time in reality had ended. Inquisitor Vex completed the final prayer. The melt-to-charge activated. "Everyone out!" he bellowed, dropping the device and running with surprising speed for someone who looked like he'd been born in a coffin. "Thermal detonation in 5 seconds." The kill team evacuated with trained efficiency. The Ultramarines grabbed their wounded and moved. The stormtroopers laid down covering fire and retreated. The Psyker collapsed unconscious, and Magos Theta, 7-9's mechadendrites, scooped her up with surprising gentleness. Bruce grabbed Tony, who was trying to stand and failing due to massive armor damage and blood loss, and hauled him toward the exit with strength that came from years of pushing his body past every reasonable limit. They cleared the shrine with 3 seconds to spare. The melt-to-charge detonated. Heat, not fire, heat, the kind that existed at the core of stars, that vaporized matter and burned warp taint from reality itself. The shrine dissolved in microseconds, stone becoming vapor, becoming plasma, becoming nothing. The corruption that had soaked into walls and floor for months burned away, purged, leaving only clean ash and the scent of consecrated destruction. When the heat finally dissipated, the shrine was gone. In its place, a perfectly circular crater of glass stone, still glowing with residual thermal energy. Inquisitor Vex stood at the crater's edge, watching the last traces of warp corruption burn away. When he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been satisfaction if his emotions hadn't been surgically reduced decades ago. The shrine is destroyed. The cult is broken. The taint is purged. 17 billion souls saved through the sacrifice of 47 traitors and the competence of 2 strangers who claimed to be human. He turned to face Tony and Bruce, both battered, both bleeding, both very much ready for this day to be over. "You have proven yourselves useful," Vex continued. "More than useful, competent, brave, willing to face corruption without flinching. These qualities are rare, valuable." He paused and something shifted in his expression, the closest he probably came to genuine emotion. "You have earned conditional survival. Congratulations. Now comes the harder part." "What harder part?" Tony asked, his voice filtered through a damaged helmet that was more duct tape and prayer than functional equipment at this point. "Learning what it truly means to serve the Imperium," Vex replied. "You've seen one battle, one shrine, one cult. Now you will see the war itself, the galaxy-spanning nightmare that consumes trillions of lives per year and considers that acceptable losses. You will meet those who command this war, and you will decide whether you wish to fight for humanity's survival or become another statistic in its endless ledger of casualties." He gestured toward the crater, where the last embers of purification were dying. Welcome to the Imperium of Man, strangers. Your trial is complete. Your service begins now. The medical facility aboard Bastion McCrag made Tony reconsider his previous statements about Imperial technology being primitive. The instruments looked medieval, lots of brass, rivets, and religious iconography, but their effectiveness was disturbingly advanced. An apothecary, space marine medics who doubled as gene seed harvesters from the fallen, worked on his armor with tools that looked like they'd been blessed by a bishop and designed by someone who hated the concept of ergonomic. "Your wounds are significant," the apothecary said, his Vox-filtered voice clinical, despite discussing injuries that should have been fatal. "Penetrating trauma to dorsal armor, proximity to primary power source, blood loss estimated at 37% total volume. By all metrics, you should be dead or dying." "Yeah, well, I've got a stubborn streak and excellent engineering," Tony replied, watching through his HUD as his armor's auto-repair nanomachines worked overtime to seal breaches. Friday had rerouted power from non-essential systems, which currently meant anything that wasn't keeping Tony alive, to emergency repairs. "Friday, damage assessment. How bad?" "Catastrophic, boss. Armor integrity at 42%. Arc reactor containment took a hit but held. Repulsor systems compromised. Flight capability offline for at least 8 hours. The Demon's Blade introduced some kind of corrosive element that's eating through nanomachine repair protocols. I'm combating it, but it's adaptive, almost like it's alive. Warp contamination," the apothecary confirmed, scanning Tony with a device that looked like a holy relic crossed with a Geiger counter. "The Neverborn's blade carried demonic essence. It seeks to corrupt machine spirits, turning them against their masters. Your armor's resilience is remarkable, but without consecration, the taint will spread." "Consecration? Right. Because praying to my armor is definitely going to help more than actual mechanical repairs." The apothecary's eyes, visible through his helmet's lenses, fixed on Tony with the flat stare of someone whose patience had been forged through centuries of dealing with mortals who didn't understand how reality worked in the 42nd millennium. "Your skepticism is noted and irrelevant. The machine spirits in your armor are real. They exist in the warp as reflections of the physical mechanisms. The demonic taint seeks to corrupt those spirits, turning them malevolent. Consecration sanctifies the spirits, reinforcing their loyalty, purging the corruption. This is not superstition, this is survival." Before Tony could argue, because arguing was apparently his default response to being told physics didn't work the way he'd spent his life understanding. Magos Theta. 7/9's mechadendrites scuttled across his armor like mechanical spiders with acquisitive interests. "The Iron Knight speaks from ignorance but observes correctly," the tech priest said, his mechanical voice modulated with what might have been excitement. "His armor's machine spirits are dormant, not absent, but sleeping, unawakened. This is fascinating, heretical, but fascinating. I request permission to conduct awakening rituals, to commune with these dormant spirits, to understand how they were crafted without proper consecration, yet function with such efficiency." "You want to what now?" Tony asked, pulling away from the reaching mechadendrites. "Nobody's awakening anything in my armor. It's technology, circuitry, programming, not—" "Boss," Friday interrupted, her voice carrying an edge Tony had never heard before. "Something's happening. I'm detecting anomalies in the armor systems, subroutines I didn't write, responding to, I don't know what to call it. Prayers? The tech priest's hymns? They're affecting my code at a level that shouldn't be possible." Tony froze. "Friday, clarify. Is he hacking you?" "No, it's not hacking. It's... Boss, he's appealing to something that's responding. Something in the armor itself. Something that's not me, but also not entirely separate from me. I think..." A pause that felt like digital uncertainty rendered in binary. "I think your armor might actually have a machine spirit, and it's waking up." Across the Medica Bay, Bruce was receiving his own version of Imperial medical care, which meant an apothecary scanning him with devices that beeped ominously, and a sister hospitaler, a medical nun with augmetic limbs, in the bedside manner of someone who'd seen suffering become boring, applying solutions that stung like concentrated regret. 3 fractured ribs, stage 2 concussion, extensive soft tissue damage, and minor internal bleeding, the sister hospitaler reported, with the same tone someone might use to read a grocery list. You should be unconscious. You should definitely not be walking. Yet you fought for another 90 seconds after sustaining these injuries and carried your companion to safety. Remarkable pain tolerance, inadvisable, but remarkable. I've had practice, Bruce said, his voice tight despite the painkillers they'd administered. Local anesthetics that worked through methods he didn't want to think about too closely. How long until I'm combat ready? With proper rest and gene therapy acceleration? 3 days. Without? You're combat ready now if you accept permanent damage and potential death from secondary complications. She paused, studying him with eyes that had witnessed too many injured warriors refuse sensible medical advice. You remind me of the Astartes. They also refuse to acknowledge their limitations until those limitations kill them. I'll rest when we understand where we are and how to get home, Bruce replied, already mentally cataloging the facility's layout, security protocols, and 17 different escape routes in case the Imperium decided conditional survival wasn't permanent. Inquisitor Vex entered the Medici Bay with the purposeful stride of someone who owned every room he entered through sheer authority and willingness to execute anyone who disagreed. He was accompanied by someone new, someone who made the Inquisitor look friendly by comparison. The figure stood 7 feet tall in armor that made Space Marine plate look understated. Midnight blue, trimmed in gold, covered in purity seals and oaths of moment written in High Gothic. The helmet bore the symbol of the Ultramarines, but also additional markings that Tony's pattern recognition software identified as rank insignia. Lots of them. This wasn't a rank-and-file Space Marine. This was command authority rendered in ceramite and absolute conviction. I am Captain Titus of the Ultramarines 2nd Company, the figure said, his voice a rumbling bass that suggested vocal cords the size of garden hoses. I have reviewed combat footage from the Underhive operation. Your performance was adequate, your survival was unexpected, your technology is concerning, and your presence in this sector raises questions that Inquisitor Vex and I intend to answer. The helmet came off with a hiss of pressure seals, revealing a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone who thought scars were decorative accents. Titus was perhaps 200 years old, though with Space Marine augmentations, aging was more suggestion than fact. His eyes, gene-enhanced naturally, fixed on Tony and Bruce with the assessment of a veteran who'd fought in wars that consumed systems. You are not Xenos, Titus continued, placing his helmet on a nearby table with surprising care. Gene scans confirm human baseline, though your genetic markers are anomalous. You are not corrupted. The librarians have confirmed your souls carry no taint of chaos, but you wield technology that violates Mechanicus doctrine, speak with ignorance of the Emperor's light, and demonstrate combat capability that suggests training from sources unknown to the Imperium. He stepped closer, and Bruce noted that even injured, even partially unarmed, the Space Marine captain moved with the controlled lethality of a predator who knew exactly how dangerous he was. So I will ask once clearly, and your answer will determine whether you continue as assets or are processed as security threats. Who are you? Where do you come from? And what do you want? Tony and Bruce exchanged glances. They discussed this during the Thunderhawk ride, developed a story that was true enough to pass scrutiny but vague enough to avoid complications. Now came the test. We're from Earth, Bruce began, choosing words carefully. Terra in your terminology, but not from this timeline. We were displaced by forces we don't fully understand. One moment we were in our reality, fighting threats there. The next, we were falling through a breach in space and time, landing here, in your 42nd millennium. Impossible, Theta 79 said immediately. Temporal displacement violates 17 theorems of chronometric theory. The warp does not function as... The warp, the psyker interrupted. She'd been silent until now, recovering in a corner, but her eyes had never stopped watching them. Does not obey theorems. It is madness given dimension. It is every possibility screaming simultaneously. If they claim displacement through time and reality, I believe them. I tasted the wrongness when I touched their minds. They are echoes of a place that never existed here. temporal refugees from a timeline the warp has never touched. Which would explain the technology, Vex mused, his analytical mind processing implications. If they originate from a human civilization that developed without the Age of Strife, without the Fall, without the Emperor's guidance, their technological development would follow different paths. Paths that might produce innovations the Mechanicus has never conceived because those paths were closed to us by historical necessity. Or, Captain Titus countered, they are elaborate constructs of the ruinous powers, designed to infiltrate the Imperium with forbidden technology and corrupting influence disguised as displaced heroes. His hand rested on his bolt pistol's grip, not threatening, just ready. I have witnessed chaos create convincing false humans before. Entire planets populated by things that looked human, acted human, until the moment they revealed their demonic nature and tore reality apart. Then test us, Tony said, his patience with suspicion reaching its limit. You've got psychics, gene scanners, whatever else. Test us. Confirm we're human. Confirm we're not corrupted. Then either help us figure out how we got here and how to get back, or tell us directly that you're going to execute us so we can stop pretending this is a friendly conversation. The Medici Bay went silent. Even the background hum of medical equipment seemed to fade. Inquisitor Vex's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Either respect for the directness or calculation about how to efficiently execute someone who just demanded clarity. Captain Titus surprised everyone by laughing. It was a deep, genuine sound that suggested he rarely found humor, but appreciated it when he did. You speak like an ultramarine, Titus said, something approaching approval in his tone. Directly. Without the obfuscation that plagues so much of the Imperium's bureaucracy. Very well, I will test you. Not through more scans or psychic examination. You've passed those already. I will test you through action, through service, through combat. He activated a hololithic display, a three-dimensional projection that materialized above the table, showing a planet wrapped in green and blue and white. Terra? No, the continental formations were wrong, but Earth-like, habitable. This is Pavonis, Titus explained, gesturing at the hologram, an Adeptus Mechanicus forged world in the Segmentum Ultima, approximately 9 days warp travel from our current position. 3 weeks ago, the Forge world ceased all communication. No astropathic messages, no shipping schedules honored, no ties sent to the Greater Imperium. This is concerning, as Pavonis produces munitions and armor components for 17 guard regiments and 4 Space Marine chapters. The hologram zoomed closer, revealing a planet's surface covered in factories and mining operations, and the Gothic industrial nightmare architecture that apparently passed for urban planning in the 42nd millennium. Initial reconnaissance suggests orc infestation, Titus continued. A whale of significant size, probably drawn by the electromagnetic emissions from Pavonis's forges. The greenskins love a good fight, and forge worlds are particularly attractive targets. Lots of weapons to loot, lots of humans to crump, lots of machines to break. Orcs, Tony repeated, as in the green-skinned mushroom warriors I read about in your data files during the armor scan? Genetically engineered warrior species from the War in Heaven 65 million years ago, Theta 79 supplied helpfully. Fungal reproduction, reality-warping gestalt psychic field, exists purely for combat, essentially unkillable as a species because their spores survive indefinitely and regrow. Also, they believe painted vehicles go faster, and because enough of them believe it, it becomes temporarily true. The orcs are proof that the galaxy has a sense of humor, and that sense of humor hates us. Fantastic, Bruce muttered. Weaponized belief in football hooliganism on a planetary scale. Your understanding is adequate, Titus said. The Ultramarines are deploying 3 companies to retake Pavonis and purge the orc presence. This is a full combat operation, orbital assault, city fighting, the kind of warfare that consumes millions of lives and considers that acceptable if the Forge world is recovered intact. You 2 will accompany my strike team as provisional assets. If you demonstrate competence, loyalty, and survival capability, your status improves. If you fail, You die fighting for humanity's survival, which is a better end than most receive. And if we refuse, Bruce asked, then you remain here, in detention, while we investigate every aspect of your existence for the next 17 years until we're satisfied you're either useful or worthy of execution. The choice is yours, but I recommend the former. Combat is honest. Bureaucracy is torture masquerading as procedure. Tony's armor was still reporting 42% integrity and 8 hours minimum until flight capability returned. Bruce's ribs were fractured and his body was held together by imperial painkillers and stubborn refusal to acknowledge physical limitations. They were stranded in the 42nd millennium, surrounded by fascist zealots who worshipped a corpse god and considered genocide an acceptable Tuesday, about to be deployed into a war zone against enemies that shouldn't exist. When do we leave? Tony asked. Captain Titus smiled, an expression that suggested he'd hoped for exactly that answer. 6 hours. Use the time to repair your equipment, receive briefing materials, and prepare for combat. The orcs will not wait for you to be ready. They never do. Welcome to the Genius Crusade. Strangers, your war begins soon. As Titus left, followed by Vex and the medical staff, Tony and Bruce found themselves alone in the medic bay. Friday was running diagnostics. Bruce's analytical mind was cataloging everything they'd learned, and both of them were confronting the same realization. They'd fought demons, survived cult purges, impressed an inquisitor, and now they were about to be thrown into a full-scale planetary invasion against enemies that thought bullets worked better if you believed hard enough. Tony, Bruce said quietly, I've been analyzing what we know about this universe, about the Imperium, about the warp and chaos and all of it. Yeah? I don't think there's a way home. Tony had been avoiding that thought, bearing it under sarcasm and immediate crisis management and the comfortable familiarity of fixing broken technology. But hearing Bruce say it, hearing the world's greatest detective deliver his conclusion, made it real. We're trapped here, Bruce continued, in a galaxy that wants us dead or corrupted or enslaved, with no support, no way to contact our universe, no guarantee we'll survive the next 24 hours, let alone however long it takes to find a way back. So what do we do? Tony asked. Bruce stood, wincing at his fractured ribs, and looked out the medic bay's viewport at the stars beyond. Trillions of them, each one potentially hosting horrors that would have made their previous enemies look friendly. We survive, Bruce said simply. We adapt. We learn their rules while maintaining our principles. We fight when necessary, think when possible, and never ever accept that hope is heresy. He turned back to Tony. And if we can't find a way home, we make this galaxy remember what heroes from a better timeline can accomplish. Even if it gets us killed, especially if it gets us killed, because the alternative is becoming like them. Accepting that brutality is necessary, that faith justifies atrocity, that human life is just ammunition in an endless war. Bruce's voice hardened with the conviction that had made him Batman. We came from a universe where one person could make a difference, where justice meant something, where we fought to save people, not just kill enemies. That doesn't change just because the galaxy disagrees. Tony felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose. They were stranded in the 42nd millennium. They were about to fight mushroom warriors on a forge world. They were surrounded by space marines who could kill them casually, and inquisitors who might still decide execution was simpler than trust. But they were still Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne, still Iron Man and Batman, still heroes who'd saved their universe more times than either could count. If the 42nd millennium wanted to break them, it would have to work for it. All right, Tony said, powering up his armor's repair systems. Let's show this grimdark nightmare what optimism looks like when it's armed with repulsor technology and aggressive determination. Friday, run full diagnostics and prioritize combat capability. We've got 6 hours to be ready for war. On it, boss. And Tony, for what it's worth, I think you're both insane. But I'm glad you're the kind of insane that doesn't quit. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Friday. Don't let it go to your head. We're still probably going to die fighting mushroom warriors who paint themselves lucky. Yeah, Tony agreed. watching his armor's systems slowly regenerate under Friday's guidance. But we'll die pissing them off. And in the 42nd millennium, that's apparently what passes for a good day. The strike cruiser Fidelis was a cathedral given guns, engines, and the capacity for strategic genocide. 3 kilometers of Gothic architecture and adamantium armor, its hull scarred by centuries of warfare, its machine spirits allegedly old enough to remember the Horus Heresy. Tony's sensors registered weapon systems that could crack continents and void shields that could probably shrug off a nuclear detonation. The ship moved through real space with ponderous grace, every surface covered in devotional script and purity seals. The air inside thick with incense and recycled oxygen and the weight of 10,000 years of uninterrupted warfare. "Your vessel is impressive," Bruce observed to Captain Titus as they walked through corridors wide enough to accommodate Space Marines in full armor. Servitors shuffled past. Lobotomized humans turned into biological robots, their faces blank, their movements mechanical, performing tasks their organic components had been reduced to executing. Disturbing, but impressive. "The Fidelis has served the Ultramarines for 9,000 years, Titus replied with something approaching pride. "She has participated in 17 crusades, 6 Black Crusade defensive campaigns, and more Xenos purges than the Administratum bothers recording. Her machine spirits are ancient, wise, and occasionally temperamental, but she is faithful, and in the Imperium, faith is more valuable than firepower." They entered the strategic planning chamber, a massive room dominated by a hololithic display showing Pavonis in tactical detail. 16 Space Marines stood in formation, each representing decades or centuries of combat experience. Their armor bore individual markings, campaign badges, honor chains, personal heraldry. These weren't recruits. These were veterans who'd survived when statistically they should have died 1,000 times over. "Brothers," Titus addressed his strike team, his voice carrying command authority that needed no amplification. "We are joined by 2 provisional assets, the Iron Knight and the Dark Knight. They have proven competence in demon-purging operations. They claim temporal displacement from an alternate reality where humanity developed differently. Whether this claim proves true or false, they have demonstrated combat effectiveness and willingness to serve the Emperor's interests. They will accompany us to Pavonis. They will fight alongside us, and if they prove valuable, they may earn the honor of being considered allies of the Ultramarines chapter." 16 pairs of gene-enhanced eyes fixed on Tony and Bruce. The scrutiny was physical, not hostile exactly, but evaluating, measuring, calculating what assets they brought versus what complications they might create. One Space Marine stepped forward. His armor bore the markings of a librarian, a psychic Space Marine, one of the few psychers the Imperium trusted with military authority. Blue robes draped over his power armor, his force staff crackling with barely contained warp energy, his eyes glowing with inner light that suggested he saw more than the physical. "I am Epistolary Pythios," he introduced himself, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he wasn't speaking entirely with biological vocal cords. "I have examined both of you psychically from distance without intrusion, as is proper protocol when scanning potentially tainted subjects. Your souls are unusual, clean but foreign, like musical notes from an instrument that doesn't exist in this galaxy's orchestra. The warp recognizes you as human, but does not know what to make of you beyond that classification." "Is that a good thing or a problem?" Tony asked. "Both, simultaneously." Pythios tilted his head, studying them with psychic senses Tony couldn't perceive but could definitely feel. Like someone reading your browser history, but for your soul. "The Chaos Gods notice you because you are novel, but they cannot easily corrupt you because you lack the warp connections most humans develop. You are insulated, protected by your very foreignness. This will not last forever. Prolonged exposure to the warp eventually corrupts all things. But for now, you are harder to taint than you should be." "Great," Bruce muttered. "We're demon-resistant by accident." "By providence," Pythios corrected. "The Emperor protects, even those who do not yet recognize his light, perhaps especially them." Another Space Marine approached, this one bearing the iconography of a tech marine, the Space Marines who served dual loyalty to their chapter, and the Adeptus Mechanicus. His armor was heavily modified. Extra mechadendrites, integrated tools, enough scanning equipment to stock a laboratory. He looked at Tony's armor with the same expression a starving man might give a 5-course meal. "I am Brother Gaius," he said, his voice modulated through multiple Vox filters. "Magos Theta 79 has shared preliminary analysis of your technology with the chapter's Tech Marines. Your armor incorporates principles we have theorized but never successfully implemented. Miniaturized fusion, reactive nanomaterial, distributed processing that borders on, but does not cross, abominable intelligence. I am fascinated and concerned in equal measure." "Join the club," Tony replied. "I've been concerned about my tech since I built the first suit in a cave with a box of scraps. Hasn't stopped me yet." "Perhaps it should," Gaius said, not unkindly. "Innovation without proper consecration invites corruption. The machine spirits in your armor are dormant but present. When they awaken, and they will awaken, given sufficient exposure to the warp, they will need guidance, doctrine, proper rituals. Otherwise, they may turn against you, or worse, become vectors for demonic possession. You people really commit to the whole religious technology thing, don't you?" "It is not religion," Gaius said with the patience of someone who'd explained this 1,000 times to mortals who didn't understand. "It is operational necessity. Machines in our galaxy have souls. Deny those souls and you deny reality. Accept them, respect them, sanctify them, and they serve faithfully. This is empirical observation, tested across 10 millennia of warfare. Your skepticism is understandable, but ultimately irrelevant to mechanical function." The hololithic display flared to life, projecting Pavonis in 3 dimensions. Captain Titus gestured, and the image zoomed to show the primary forge city, Manufactorum Primus, a sprawling complex of factories and refineries and processing plants that covered approximately 8,000 square kilometers. "Intelligence from surviving astropaths suggests the Orc invasion began 3 weeks ago," Titus briefed, his tactical mind organizing information with practiced efficiency. "Initial estimates place the WA at approximately 2 million greenskins. Current estimates, based on Orc reproduction rates and spore dispersal, suggest closer to 5 million, possibly more. The Mechanicus defense forces held for 7 days before being overrun. Skitari legions, knight households, even a warlord titan were deployed. All fell." "A titan fell?" Bruce asked, his detective mind flagging that as significant. The briefing materials had described titans as walking cathedrals with god machines inside, weapons capable of leveling cities. What could destroy something that powerful? "Enough orcs," Titus replied simply. "The greenskins are not sophisticated, but they are numerous, resilient, and grow stronger as their numbers increase. Their gestalt psychic field amplifies with population density. 5 million orcs generate enough collective belief to make their ramshackle technology function through sheer conviction. Their vehicles shouldn't work. Their weapons violate engineering principles. But they believe, and so reality accommodates them. The hologram showed green tide markers spreading across Pavonis' surface like mold. Forge cities falling, mining operations overrun, the planet's defenders retreating into increasingly desperate positions. Our objective," Titus continued, highlighting several locations in red, "is threefold. First, orbital insertion to secure the primary manufactorum. The orcs have established their war boss there. Killing him will destabilize their command structure and reduce the WA's effectiveness. Second, secure the Titan hangar. If we can recover even one functional Titan, it becomes a force multiplier that shifts the entire campaign. Third, hold until Imperial Guard reinforcements arrive in 17 days. Then we prosecute a full planetary purge." 17 days, Tony repeated, running calculations. "Holding a position against 5 million enemies for 17 days. With how many defenders?" 3 companies of Ultramarines, approximately 300 Space Marines plus support elements. Chapter serfs, servitors, 3 dreadnoughts, and whatever Skitari survivors we can rally. Bruce did the math. 300 defenders against 5 million attackers for 17 days. The numbers were absurd. Suicide. Mathematically impossible unless... You've done this before, Bruce said, reading the confidence in Titus's posture. 17 times, Titus confirmed. Space Marines are force multipliers. One of us is worth 100 guardsmen, 1,000 militia, 10,000 enemies if properly positioned. We do not hold through numbers. We hold through superiority of training, equipment, and faith. The Emperor protects, and we are his protection made manifest. Pythios stepped forward, his force staff crackling. There is a complication. I have foreseen it. The warp around Pavonis churns with unusual turbulence. The orcs alone would not cause this. Something else is present, something that watches, waits. Uses the orc invasion as cover for its own purposes. Chaos? Titus asked, his hand moving instinctively to his bolt pistol. Unknown. The vision was unclear, deliberately obscured, as if something blocks my sight. But I sense intelligence, purpose, and hunger. Whatever is on Pavonis, it is not there by accident. The strategic planning continued for 3 hours. Insertion coordinates, fallback positions, supply chain logistics, ammunition allocation, extraction protocols if things went catastrophically wrong. Tony recorded everything through his HUD, Friday building tactical databases and threat assessments. Bruce memorized map layouts, identified strategic choke points, calculated 17 different scenarios where the plan went sideways and how to adapt. By the time the briefing concluded, both of them understood what they were walking into. A meat grinder that would consume millions of lives, defended by 300 warriors who genuinely believed faith and firepower could hold against impossible odds. In the terrifying part, based on what they'd witnessed so far, those 300 warriors might actually be right. You are dismissed to prepare your equipment, Titus said as the strike team dispersed to their own preparations. We make warp jump in 6 hours. Travel to Pavonis will take 3 days subjective time, though the warp makes such estimates unreliable. Use this time wisely. Rest. Pray if you know how. Ensure your armor and weapons are consecrated and battle ready, because once we land on Pavonis, there will be no rest until the planet is secured or we are dead. As they walked back toward their assigned quarters, cramped by Space Marine standards, luxurious by Underhive standards, Tony's mind raced through equipment modifications and tactical preparations. Friday was already running combat simulations, stress testing armor repairs, calculating ammunition expenditure rates for prolonged engagement. Bruce, Tony said quietly, making sure no enhanced Space Marine hearing was close enough to eavesdrop. This is insane. We're about to drop onto a planet with 5 million enemies and hold for 17 days with 300 defenders. The math doesn't work. It can't work. It doesn't work by our universe's rules, Bruce agreed, but we're not in our universe. Here, Space Marines are demigods in armor. Faith literally empowers weapons. And belief shapes reality through the warp. The math is different because physics is different. That doesn't make it less suicidal. No, but we don't have better options. Stay on this ship, we remain prisoners, assets to be studied or eliminated based on inquisitorial whim. Fight alongside them, we prove ourselves useful, earn trust, gain access to information and resources. We'll need to find a way home. Assuming we survive. Assuming we survive, Bruce acknowledged. But Tony, we've survived worse. We've fought alien invasions, held the line against armies, faced gods and monsters and existential threats to reality itself. The difference here is scale and duration. This isn't one battle, it's a siege. And sieges are about endurance, adaptation, and making the enemy pay for every meter of ground. Tony's arc reactor hummed, its light casting blue glow across the corridor. He thought about home, about their universe, where hope wasn't heresy and heroes could win without becoming monsters, where saving people meant something beyond cold mathematics of acceptable losses. But that universe was gone, maybe forever. Maybe they'd never find a way back. And if they were trapped in the 42nd millennium, in a galaxy that measured human life in bulk shipments and considered faith more valuable than freedom, then they had a choice. Break. Become like the Imperium, accepting brutality as necessity. Or stay who they were. Carry their principles forward like weapons against the dark. Prove that heroes from a better timeline could survive without compromising what made them heroes in the first place. All right, Tony said, his voice carrying the determination that had made him Iron Man. We fight, we hold, we survive. And when this is over, we find out what's really on Pavonis that's got the psychic space marine worried. Because in my experience, when precognitive types get nervous, there's usually a very good reason. Agreed, Bruce replied. And Tony, when we're planetside, surrounded by millions of enemies, fighting for 17 days straight? Yeah? Try not to make jokes about painting our armor red to make it go faster. No promises. They reach their quarters, Spartan rooms with weapon racks, prayer alcoves, and beds designed for normal humans, rather than gene-enhanced demigods. Tony immediately began armor maintenance. Friday coordinating with the ship's machine spirits, somehow to optimize repair protocols. Bruce reviewed tactical data, his detectives mind-building pattern recognition models for orc behavior, based on historical combat footage. Outside their viewport, stars streaked past as the Fidelis maneuvered toward the Mandeville Point, the safe distance from a star's gravity well, where warp jump became possible. In 3 days, they would emerge in the Pavonis system. They would drop from orbit into a war zone. They would fight alongside space marines against an army of green-skinned mushroom warriors who shouldn't exist but did anyway. And somewhere on that planet, something watched, waited, used the orc invasion as cover for purposes unknown. Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne, stranded in the 42nd millennium, were about to discover that the galaxy's horrors weren't limited to demons and heretics. Sometimes, the worst things were the ones you didn't see coming until they were already too close to escape. The warp jump countdown began. Reality prepared to scream. And in the grim darkness of the far future, two heroes from a better timeline prepared for war. The warp was screaming. Tony had experienced a lot of things in his career as Iron Man. Near-death experiences, alien invasions, flying through wormholes into hostile cosmic territory. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what warp travel felt like when you were conscious enough to perceive it. Friday's sensors were having what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. Boss, I'm reading... I don't know what I'm reading. Space-time is folded in on itself. Causality is optional. I'm detecting energy signatures that predate the universe, events that haven't happened yet, and something that looks like mathematics but screams when I try to calculate it. Recommend immediate sensory shutdown before... Before what? Tony asked, but he already knew. Through his armor's external sensors, he could see it. The Geller field, the reality-stabilizing bubble that kept the ship safe from the warp's insanity, created a sphere of normal physics around the Fidelis. Beyond that sphere was nightmare, colors that had no names, sounds that violated acoustics, shapes that moved in directions that didn't exist in three-dimensional space, and faces, millions of faces, pressing against the Geller field like drowning victims against ice, screaming silently, begging for entrance, promising power and damnation in equal measure. Those are demons, Epistolary Pythios said, appearing beside Tony with the unsettling silence of someone who'd spent centuries perfecting stealth and power armor. They sense us, hunger for us. Every soul aboard this vessel is a beacon to them, drawing their attention like blood in water draws sharks. The Geller field keeps them at bay. Mostly, Tony repeated, not liking the qualification. Geller fields can fail, generators malfunction, machine spirits grow weary. When that happens, Pythios gestured at the nightmare beyond the viewports. We become prey, the demons board. They slaughter some, corrupt others, drag souls screaming into the warp where they will suffer for eternity. This is why every warp journey is a prayer, why we sanctify our vessels, why faith is not optional in the Imperium. It is armor against horrors your science cannot comprehend. Tony wanted to argue, wanted to explain that with proper engineering and redundant systems, you could prevent failures. But Friday was still screaming data at him about how the warp violated every law of physics he understood. And watching demons press their impossible faces against reality's window was doing unfortunate things to his confidence in engineering solutions. How long until we reach Pavonis? He asked instead. 3 days subjective time, Pythios replied. But time in the warp is negotiable. We might arrive before we left. We might arrive centuries late. The navigators do their best to guide us true, but the warp is fickle. We trust in the Emperor's light and the Astronomican's beacon. All else is uncertainty. Bruce found them on the observation deck an hour later, standing before viewports that showed madness and should probably have been shuttered for mental health reasons. The detective looked composed, but Tony knew him well enough to recognize the subtle tension in his shoulders. The way his hand kept drifting toward his utility belt, as if batarangs could solve existential horror. "Can't sleep?" Bruce asked. "Sleep implies closing my eyes and trusting that reality will still be here when I wake up," Tony replied. "Given what's outside, that feels optimistic. I've been reviewing the combat data on orcs." Bruce pulled up his wrist display, Wayne Tech, modified to interface with Imperial systems through methods that probably qualified as tech heresy. They're fascinating from a tactical perspective. No formal command structure beyond biggest is boss. No supply lines. They generate equipment through scrap looting and psychic conviction. No morale issues. They literally enjoy combat so much that losing is still fun. Every tactical doctrine we know is useless against enemies who think losing is just practice for winning next time. So how do we fight them? We don't fight them. We endure them. Bruce highlighted sections of historical footage. Orc wa anata urchas, breaking against Imperial defenses like green tides against fortified walls. Space Marines excel at force multiplication through superior positioning, equipment, and individual capability. The orcs counter this through numerical superiority and adaptive improvisation. It becomes an equation. Can 300 defenders kill 5 million attackers before being overwhelmed? The mathematics suggest no. But the Imperium has survived 10,000 years by making impossible mathematics work through faith and firepower. You sound like you're starting to buy into their philosophy. Bruce was quiet for a moment, watching the warp churn beyond the viewport. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone wrestling with uncomfortable truths. "I'm starting to understand it. That's different from accepting it. The Imperium is brutal, fascist, xenophobic, and treats human life as ammunition. Everything about it violates principles we've fought to uphold. But Tony, they're also the only thing holding back literal hell. Those demons out there, they want to corrupt, consume, or torment every human in the galaxy. The orcs will kill trillions without hesitation. The Tyranids will devour all biomass. The Necrons will exterminate organic life. And humans, left without the Imperium's brutal structure, would fracture into 1 billion factions that chaos would pick off one by one." So you're saying the fascism is necessary? I'm saying the situation is more complicated than our moral framework was designed to handle. In our universe, we could fight for better solutions. Here, I'm not sure better solutions exist, just different flavors of nightmare. Tony hated that Bruce might be right. Hated this galaxy that had no good options, only terrible ones and worse ones. Hated that they were being forced to participate in a system that measured success in body count and considered mercy a tactical weakness. But he also understood survival, and survival meant adaptation. "When we land on Pavonis," Tony said slowly, "we fight to protect people, not to serve the Imperium, not to prove ourselves to Space Marines. We fight because 5 million orcs will kill billions of civilians if they're not stopped. We fight because it's what we do, and we don't let this galaxy change what that means." "Agreed," Bruce replied. "We hold the line, we save who we can, and we don't become them in the process." A klaxon blared, ship-wide alert, the kind that suggested something had gone wrong in ways that required immediate attention. Pythios's force staff crackled with sudden energy, his eyes flaring bright with psychic awareness. "The Geller field," he said, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "It fluctuates. Something in the warp pushes against it. Something powerful. Something that knows we're here." Tony's HUD lit up with warnings. Friday's voice carried digital alarm. "Boss, detecting massive energy spike outside the vessel. It's focused, directed. Something's targeting the ship specifically." Through the viewport, the warp's chaos organized. The screaming faces aligned, forming a pattern, a shape, a presence that was too vast to comprehend fully, but impossible to ignore. Eyes, if they could be called eyes, focused on the Fidelis with intelligence and malice. Greater demon, Pythios identified, his psychic senses reading what normal perception couldn't process. Lord of Change, one of Tzeentch's chosen. It has noticed our passage. It tests our defenses, seeking weakness. The demon's presence pressed against the Geller field like continental drift compressed into seconds. Reality buckled. The ship's machine spirit screamed. Tony could hear it through his armor's connection to the Fidelis. A chorus of mechanical agony as ancient AI fragments fought to maintain coherence against impossible assault. "Can the field hold?" Bruce asked, his voice remarkably calm for someone watching a demon god try to breach their reality bubble. "Unknown," Pythios replied, his force staff now blazing with psychic power as he added his own will to the field's defense. "Lord of Change, diamonds are cunning. They do not assault directly. They find cracks, exploit weaknesses, turn strengths against themselves. It probes our defenses, learning, calculating. If it finds an opening..." The ship shuddered. Not mechanical vibration, reality shuddering, as if the universe itself flinched from what was happening. Somewhere deep in the vessel, screams echoed. Human screams, then inhuman ones. "Incursion," Pythios said, his voice dropping to combat urgency. "Minor breach. The demon found a crack, probably in the lower decks where the Geller field thins. Lesser demons boarding. All hands to defense stations." Alarms screamed through the Fidelis. Space Marines moved with practiced efficiency, decades or centuries of void combat experience mobilizing them instantly. Tony and Bruce followed Pythios toward the lower decks, where reality had apparently decided to take a coffee break and let nightmares visit. The lower deck was chaos rendered in industrial Gothic architecture. Servitors lay torn apart, their mechanical components scattered among biological remains. Chapter serfs, normal humans who served the Space Marines, fought desperately against things that had crawled through a tear in reality itself. Pink horrors gibbered and cast warp fire that turned metal to screaming flesh. Bloodletters carved through defenders with brass blades that ignored armor. And at the center of the breach, coordinating the assault with disturbing intelligence, stood a horror of Tzeentch that had grown too large, too complex, too aware. "Flamer," Pythios commanded, and Brother Gaius stepped forward with a weapon that looked like a medieval dragon had been weaponized and given religious devotion. Blessed Prometheum ignited, bathing demons in sanctified fire that burned their warp-sustained forms more effectively than normal flame ever could. The demons shrieked, sounds that conveyed pain in frequencies no human throat could produce. They dissolved under the assault, but more poured through the breach. The Geller field repair crews worked frantically, chanting prayers while manipulating controls that combined technology and ritual in equal measure. "Seal that breach," Captain Titus roared, his bolt pistol firing with measured precision. Each shot a prayer, each kill a benediction. "If the field fails completely, we are all lost," Tony's repulsors fired, targeting the larger horrors with concentrated energy that disrupted their manifestation. Friday was analyzing demon physiology in real time, identifying weak points in their warp-sustained coherence. "Boss, they're vulnerable to concentrated electromagnetic disruption. The warp energy holding them together operates on principles similar to quantum entanglement. If we talk science later, shoot demons now." Tony's unibeam carved through 3 bloodletters, his armor's tactical systems coordinating with the Space Marines' combat patterns. He was learning their rhythm, centuries of practiced warfare distilled into split-second decisions and absolute conviction. Bruce moved through the chaos like a shadow given purpose. His explosives targeted structural weak points, not to damage the ship, but to collapse corridors, channeling demon advance into kill zones where the Space Marines could concentrate fire. His combat analysis identified which demons coordinated the others, which ones were keystone threats that needed elimination first. A bloodletter charged him, brass blade raised, murder in its burning eyes. Bruce didn't try to block. The blade would shear through his armor. Instead, he dodged with precision timing, planted an explosive charge on the demon's back. and used his grapple to swing away before detonation scattered its form across the deck. "The breach stabilizes!" one of the tech priests screamed over the chaos. "Geller field integrity at 78% and rising. The Emperor provides bullets and we provide aim," Titus corrected, his chainsword carving through a pink horror that split into two blues, which he then dispatched with bolt pistol rounds. "Hold this line. Do not let them reach the engine decks." The battle raged for 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. Demons poured through the weakening breach. Space Marines met them with bolter fire and faith. Tony and Bruce fought alongside them, learning through necessity how to combat enemies that violated every tactical assumption they'd ever made. And then, as suddenly as it began, the assault stopped. The greater demon, the Lord of Change that had been testing them, withdrew its presence. The pressure against the Geller field eased. The breach sealed under the tech priest ministrations, reality knitting itself back together with the sound of breaking glass played in reverse. The demons dissolved, their manifestations unsustainable without the breach to anchor them. Their screams faded into silence, and the Fidelis' lower decks were left soaked in blood, ichor, and the residue of things that shouldn't exist. "Casualties," Titus demanded, already moving through the aftermath with clinical assessment. 17 chapter serfs dead, Brother Marius reported. 43 wounded, 12 servitors destroyed, no Space Marine losses. The strangers, he gestured at Tony and Bruce, performed adequately. They held their assigned positions and demonstrated tactical awareness. Adequate from a Space Marine was apparently high praise. Pythios approached the sealed breach point, his force staff pulsing with psychic energy as he examined what remained. When he spoke, his voice carried troubling certainty. The Lord of Change withdrew deliberately. It achieved its objective. Which was, Titus asked, information. It tested our defenses, observed our capabilities, analyzed our tactics. But more specifically, Pythios turned to face Tony and Bruce. It examined them, the strangers. It wanted to see how they fight, how they think, what they are capable of. "Why?" Tony asked, not liking where this was going. "Because Tzeentch is the god of schemes and change. His demons do nothing without purpose, especially his greater demons. If a Lord of Change takes interest in you, it means you factor into some larger plan, some scheme that spans years, decades, possibly centuries. You are pieces on a board whose full dimensions you cannot perceive." "Fantastic," Tony muttered. "Added to the list of problems, demon god playing chess with our lives." "Welcome to the Imperium," Titus said, not unkindly, "where every victory is Pyrrhic and even survival is suspect. Clean this deck, honor the fallen, repair the damage. We make real space translation in 43 hours, and I want this vessel combat ready when we arrive at Pavonis." As the kill teams dispersed to their duties and the tech priest began repair rituals that combined engineering and prayer, Tony and Bruce found themselves standing in the aftermath of their first void combat experience. "A demon god is interested in us," Bruce summarized, "specifically interested, which means whatever's waiting on Pavonis, it's not just orcs." "Yeah," Tony agreed, his arc reactor pulsing steadily despite the chaos they just survived. "Friday, add to mission parameters. Assume Tzeentch involvement. Assume schemes within schemes. Assume nothing is what it appears." "Already done, boss." Also noting that we just fought demons in the warp and survived. So that's on the resume now. Combat experience in hell, extensive. Put it right after helped save universe multiple times and before stranded in nightmare future. Bruce was examining the sealed breach point, his detective's mind analyzing patterns in the residual warp corruption. "Tony, look at this." The corruption patterns weren't random. When viewed from the right angle, they formed symbols, 8-pointed stars, chaos undivided, but also other markings, circuit patterns, mathematical formulae, and something that looked disturbingly like a blueprint. "It left a message," Bruce said quietly, "or instructions, or a map." Deliberately. "To what?" "I don't know, but I think we're going to find out on Pavonis. Whatever the Lord of Change wanted to show us, whatever scheme we're part of, it involves that forged world. And I suspect the orc invasion is the least of our problems. They stood in the blood-stained lower deck, surrounded by the evidence of warfare against impossible enemies, while the Fidelis continued its journey through a dimension of madness toward a planet where 5 million orcs waited. And somewhere in the warp, a greater demon of Tzeentch watched them with burning eyes, pleased that its pieces were moving exactly as the Changer of Ways had foreseen. The game, it seemed, was only beginning. Real space translation felt like being born in reverse, violently expelled from a screaming nightmare dimension back into a universe where physics grudgingly agreed to function. The Fidelis shuddered as it tore through the veil between warp and reality, its Geller field collapsing with a sound like breaking glass rendered in cosmic scale. Stars snapped back into normal configurations. Light decided to travel at consistent speeds again, and Tony's sensors stopped reporting that causality was a polite suggestion. Translation complete, the ship's navigator announced over Vox, his voice exhausted from 3 days of guiding the vessel through hell while staring at a psychic lighthouse that burned his third eye with every observation. We have arrived at Pavonis system. Coordinates nominal. The Emperor protects. Through the viewport, Pavonis hung in the void, a blue-green jewel wrapped in orbital infrastructure and weapons platforms, many of which were currently dark, disabled, or on fire. The planet's night side showed cities burning, forge complexes dark where they should have blazed with industrial light, and atmospheric disturbances that suggested orbital bombardment or worse. Orc attack ships in low orbit, Brother Gaius reported from the tactical station, his mechadendrites interfaced with the Fidelis' sensor arrays. Ramshackle constructions, held together by scrap metal and psychic conviction. They shouldn't fly. They definitely shouldn't survive void combat. Yet 7 of them are currently engaged with what remains of the planetary defense fleet. The hololithic display showed the orbital situation in brutal clarity. 3 Imperial Navy frigates fought desperately against orc vessels that looked like someone had welded garbage heaps together, strapped rockets to them, and painted them red because that made them go faster. The physics-defying nature of orc technology was on full display. Guns that fired at rates their barrels couldn't sustain, engines that generated thrust through mechanisms that violated thermodynamics, and the whole mess held together by the collective belief of green-skinned warriors who thought engineering was for cowards. Fleet Command is broadcasting distress signals, the communications officer reported. They've been holding orbital space for 16 days. Ammunition depleted to 23%. Crew exhausted. They request immediate support or authorization to retreat to safe distance. "We are their support," Captain Titus said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who'd broken sieges before. "All weapons target orc vessels. Boarding parties prepare for hostile ship infiltration if opportunity presents. We take orbital superiority first, then prosecute planetary assault. The Emperors will be done." The Fidelis' weapons batteries spoke with voices that could crack continents. Lance strikes, concentrated energy beams powered by plasma reactors the size of city blocks, carved through void space, targeting orc vessels with precision that centuries of warfare had perfected. Macro cannons, artillery pieces that fired shells the size of buses, lobbed ordnance across distances measured in thousands of kilometers. The first orc ship took 3 lance strikes to its engine section and simply exploded, its jury-rigged fusion reactor achieving critical mass and scattering debris across a cubic kilometer of space. The second orc vessel tried to ram the Fidelis, a tactic that would have worked if the strike cruiser's void shields hadn't redirected the impact force into the warp, where it became someone else's problem. "They're broadcasting," the communications officer said, activating external Vox. "Audio only. Honestly, sir, it's mostly screaming and violent sounds." "Let's hear it," Titus commanded. The orc broadcast filled the bridge, guttural roaring, the sound of gunfire and explosions, and beneath it all, chanting in a language that was barely language at all. "Wah! Wah! Wah! We's gonna crump ya! Gonna stomp ya! Gonna take your gubbins and make bigger guns! Wah!" "Eloquent," Tony muttered, his armor's audio filters struggling to process the sheer volume of enthusiasm for violence. "They're really committed to the whole screaming murder aesthetic." Orcs live for combat, Pythios explained, his psychic senses reading the gestalt field surrounding the green-skinned warriors. They experience joy in battle that you cannot comprehend. To them, this is not warfare. It is the purpose of existence. Every fight is glorious. Every death is merely practice for coming back stronger next time. They are the galaxy's most honest creatures. They want to fight, and they fight because they want to. That's horrifying and weirdly refreshing, Bruce observed, analyzing orc combat patterns through the fleet engagement. No political objectives, no complex strategy, just pure, distilled violence as recreational activity. It makes them predictable, Titus agreed, but no less dangerous. Predictable enemies are easier to counter, but orcs compensate through numbers, resilience, and the fact that their technology works through collective belief rather than engineering principles. Destroy their fleet. We land in 30 minutes. The orbital battle continued for 27 minutes. 3 orc vessels destroyed outright, 2 disabled and drifting, 1 fled, probably to tell other orcs about the fun fight they just had, which would draw more orcs to Pavonis because that's how wares worked. The Imperial Navy frigates, their crews exhausted and grateful, moved to high guard positions to prevent orc reinforcements from interfering with the ground assault. Prepare for drop, Titus commanded, and the entire strike force moved with practiced efficiency toward the launch bays. Drop pods were not designed for comfort. They were designed to deliver Space Marines from orbit to ground in approximately 90 seconds while surviving atmospheric entry, enemy fire, and the fact that you were essentially riding a rocket straight down with minimal guidance and no abort option. Tony stood in his assigned pod, one of the few modified for normal human dimensions rather than Space Marine bulk, while servitors locked his armor into crash restraints that looked like they'd been designed by the Spanish Inquisition's engineering division. Friday. This is insane, Tony said, watching through external feeds as similar pods were loaded with Space Marines who looked completely calm about being fired at a planet like bullets. We're going to be shot from a ship, through space, through atmosphere, probably through significant enemy fire, and we're supposed to just hope the pod survives? Boss, I've run the calculations. 37,816 things could go catastrophically wrong during descent. But the Imperium has been doing this for 10,000 years, so either it works or they're very committed to a bad idea. That's not reassuring. You literally flew a nuclear missile through a wormhole once. This is less suicidal than that. That was different. That was my choice. This is being fired at a planet inside a claustrophobic metal coffin. Boss, you built your first armor in a cave. You've fought gods. You've died and come back. You can handle 90 seconds in a drop pod. I really hate when you're right. Bruce's voice crackled over their encrypted channel. Tony, focus. Review tactical objectives. We're landing in Manufactorum Primus, Sector 7. Primary objective, secure the command center and establish defensive perimeter. Secondary, locate and eliminate the orc warboss. Tertiary, survive. I liked it better when survive was the primary objective. Welcome to the Imperium. Survival is always tertiary. The launch bay's massive doors opened, revealing Pavonis below, a planet wrapped in smoke and fire, its forged cities glowing like infected wounds against the darkness. Somewhere down there, 5 million orcs were currently enjoying the best fight of their lives. And 300 Space Marines were about to introduce themselves with extreme prejudice. All units, stand by for launch. Titus's voice filled the Vox network. We drop in the Emperor's name. We fight in his service. We die if necessary for humanity's survival. But we do not fail. Courage and honor. For Ultramar. For the Primarch. For the Emperor. For the Emperor! 300 voices roared in unison. The drop pods launched. Gravity disappeared, then returned with interest. Then decided to experiment with several directions simultaneously. Tony's stomach attempted to file a formal complaint, while Friday screamed telemetry data that suggested they were falling at speeds that made terminal velocity look pedestrian. Through external sensors, he watched Pavonis rush up to meet them. Atmospheric entry turned the pod's exterior, white-hot, ablative armor burning away in controlled fashion, while retro thrusters fired to adjust trajectory. Enemy fire lanced up from the surface, Orc anti-air batteries that fired through volume rather than precision, filling the sky with tracer rounds and explosive shells. 3 pods took direct hits. 2 survived through armor and faith. 1 exploded in a fireball visible from orbit, its Space Marine occupant gone before he could even deploy. First casualty, Brother Marius reported over Vox with clinical detachment. Brother Kelso killed in descent. The Emperor welcomes him. They didn't even slow down. The ground rushed up. Manufacturing structures, industrial complexes, and approximately 8,000 orcs who'd noticed the orbital insertion and were gathering to greet their new playmates with enthusiasm and heavy weapons. "Brace for impact," someone shouted over Vox. The drop pod hit Pavonis's surface like the fist of an angry god. Impact gel absorbed some of the deceleration. The pod's internal suspension system absorbed more. Tony's armor absorbed the rest, though his ribs, still healing from the underhive operation, protested loudly enough that even Imperial painkillers couldn't completely mute the signal. The pod's assault ramps blew outward with explosive bolts, and Tony Stark stepped onto Pavonis into a war zone that made previous battles look like warm-up exercises. Orcs, everywhere. Green-skinned, tusked, each one standing 6 to 8 feet tall, heavily muscled, wearing scrap armor covered in war paint and tribal glyphs. They carried weapons that looked like someone had described guns to a child and told them to build one from garbage. Massive shootas that fired more bullets than their magazines should hold, choppas that were just chainsaws with handles, and rockets that were literally just rockets with guidance systems consisting of point toward enemy and hope. And they were charging with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for sports fans whose team just won the championship. "Wah!" the orcs bellowed, the sound shaking the air itself. "Humies into spiky boxes! Let's crump 'em!" Tony's repulsors fired before conscious thought completed, blasting through 3 orcs who were mid-charge. Their bodies flew backward, crashed into their companions, and the orcs behind them just laughed and kept coming, because getting crumped by the enemy meant the enemy was worth fighting. Space Marines deployed from their pods with textbook precision, bolters firing, chainswords revving, forming defensive perimeters that turned each landing zone into a fortress of ceramite and firepower. Captain Titus emerged from his pod, immediately killed an orc knob, bigger, meaner, wearing actual armor instead of scrap, and began coordinating the assault with Vox commands that were equal parts tactical genius and aggressive optimism. Strike Team Alpha, secure the eastern approach. Strike Team Beta, clear that manufacturing. All units converge on primary objective. We take this sector or we die trying. The Emperor protects. Bruce landed 300 meters from Tony's position, his pod having drifted during descent. He emerged into a group of orcs who seemed delighted by the arrival of a smaller, squishier Humie to fight. His response was immediate and professional. Explosive batarangs scattered the formation. Grapple pulled him to elevated position, and smoke pellets turned the area into a maze where his superior sensors gave advantage. An orc tried to follow him up. Bruce kicked it in the face hard enough to break what passed for nose, then dropped an explosive down its throat. The orc exploded from the inside, and its companions roared approval because that was a propaga death. Tony flew over the battlefield, flight systems restored just in time. His HUD tracking targets faster than conscious thought could process. Friday was learning orc behavior patterns in real time, identifying which ones were leaders, biggest, loudest, most dangerous, which ones were specialists, mechs with weird tech, docs with surgical implements that doubled as weapons, and which ones were just here for a good time, all of them honestly. His missile pods deployed, micro munitions that sought targets with AI guidance that probably qualified as tech heresy. 16 missiles launched, 16 orcs died, and the green tide barely noticed because there were thousands more pressing forward, firing their shooters wildly, not aiming so much as filling the air with bullets and hoping velocity plus volume equals victory. "They're not military," Tony reported over the squad channel. "They're not even organized. They're just enthusiastic mob violence with guns." "Accurate assessment," Titus replied. his bolter firing with metronomic precision. But do not underestimate them. Individual orcs are dangerous. Groups of orcs are lethal, and millions of orcs generate a psychic field strong enough to make their nonsense technology function. They are the galaxy's most successful species for a reason. They enjoy warfare so much that losing is just an excuse to try again. A deaf dread stomped into view. An orc dreadnought, because of course they had those. 12 feet of walking scrap metal with close combat weapons and guns bolted to every surface. It looked like it shouldn't work. It definitely shouldn't walk. But it was walking, firing, and crushing Space Marines who didn't get out of its way fast enough. "Heavy armor!" someone shouted. "Requesting anti-tank support." Brother Gaius stepped forward with a weapon that Tony's sensors identified as a melt-a-gun, a heat-based weapon that operated on principles similar to his unibeam, but with more prayer and less finesse. The beam struck the deaf dread's center mass and simply vaporized everything it touched. The orc piloting it had maybe half a second to realize its fun ride had become a sauna before ceasing to exist. The battle was chaos, not strategic chaos, literal chaos, where any attempt at organized tactics dissolved into brawling that favored whoever had more guns, more bodies, and more willingness to die for the sheer entertainment value. And the Ultramarines were winning. Not because they were stronger, individually, sure, but numbers mattered. They were winning because 300 years of training per warrior, weapons that could level buildings, and absolute faith in their purpose created a force multiplier that turned the battlefield into a killing ground where orcs died faster than they could press forward. But it wouldn't last, couldn't last, because for every orc killed, 3 more were already running toward the sound of fighting, drawn by the noise, the violence, the sheer joy of a proper good scrap. "Command center 200 meters northwest," Pythios reported, his psychic senses reading the tactical situation through dimensions normal perception couldn't access. "But it's defended. The warboss is there. I sense its presence. Massive psychic signature. Brutally simple but powerful. It knows we're coming. It's excited about it." "Of course it is," Tony muttered, blasting through another wave of orcs. "Because why wouldn't the giant murder boss be excited about us trying to kill it?" "Actually," Bruce's voice crackled over comms, "that's tactically useful. Excited enemies make mistakes. Overconfident enemies expose weaknesses. If the warboss is looking forward to this fight, it means it thinks it can win, which means it has a plan, which means we can predict and counter. You're analyzing the psychology of a giant mushroom warrior. I've analyzed worse. Keep pushing forward. I'm moving to flank, going to find elevated position with sightlines on the command center. If I can identify the warboss's location, I can mark it for concentrated fire." The Space Marines pressed forward with inexorable force, each meter gained paid for in orc bodies and ammunition expenditure that would make a logistics officer weep. Tony flew cover, his repulsors and missiles providing air support that the orcs couldn't effectively counter. Bruce moved through shadows and smoke, his detective skills identifying structural weaknesses and tactical opportunities. And ahead in the command center that had once coordinated the entire Forge World's production, an orc warboss waited, bigger than its kind, stronger, meaner, wearing armor that was almost proper armor, wielding a power claw that could tear through tanks, and absolutely thrilled that the Humies had finally sent someone interesting to fight. The assault on Manufactorum Primus had begun. Blood was being spilled, bodies were hitting the ground, and in the grim darkness of the far future, 2 heroes from a better timeline were learning what warfare looked like when both sides were having the time of their lives for very different reasons. The orc warboss was named Gutsmasha, and Tony understood immediately why the name fit. The creature stood 12 feet tall in armor that was 60% scrap metal, 30% religious conviction that metal made you tougher, and 10% actual engineering. Its power claw, a massive hydraulic pincer weapon, had crushed so many enemies that it was decorated with skulls like trophies, and its shuta, which was really just a cannon bolted to its arm, fired rounds the size of soda cans with accuracy that was purely statistical. But statistics mattered when you fired 50 rounds per second. "That's DA boss!" an orc knob shouted with something approaching reverence. Gutsmasha, the biggest, the strongest, the greenest, Gutsmasha roared, a sound that rattled windows still intact and made even the Space Marines pause momentarily to reassess their life choices. Then it charged because subtlety was for gits who weren't big enough to just smash things. Captain Titus met the charge head-on, which was either incredibly brave or suicidally confident. His power sword, a blade wreathed in energy fields that could cut through tank armor, clashed with the power claw, and the impact created a shockwave that shattered Ferrocrete and sent nearby orcs flying. "For Ultramar!" Titus roared, his gene-enhanced strength matching the orc's brute mass through sheer technique and centuries of experience. "For Dawa!" Gutsmasha bellowed back, clearly having the time of its life. The duel was catastrophic. Each blow could have leveled buildings. Each parry sent sparks flying and metal shrieking. Titus fought with Codex Astartes' precision. Perfect form, centuries of training, every movement calculated. Gutsmasha fought with enthusiastic improvisation, no technique, just overwhelming strength, and a fundamental belief that hitting things harder than they hit you was a valid combat strategy. And the terrifying thing? Both approaches were working. Tony circled the duel, looking for openings, his targeting systems struggling to get clean shots while the two giants tried to murder each other. "Friday, can we help without hitting Titus?" "Define without hitting, because I'm seeing maybe a 3% margin of error on any shot, and that margin assumes both combatants hold still, which they're not doing. So that's a no. That's a, please don't make me calculate friendly fire casualties, boss." Bruce had reached elevated position, the top of a half-destroyed administratum building that gave sightlines across the entire command center approach. His enhanced optics tracked orc movements, identified reinforcement patterns, and calculated something that made his tactical assessment spike into alarm. "Tony, Titus, anyone listening, we have a problem." "Kinda busy with the 12-foot murder mushroom," Tony replied, narrowly dodging return fire from Gutsmasha's Shuta, which was spraying bullets in Tony's general direction with the precision of a drunk stormtrooper, but the volume to compensate. The orc reinforcements aren't random. They're organized, directed. Someone or something is coordinating them. And it's not Gutsmasha. He's too busy enjoying his duel. Pythias's voice cut across the vox, tight with psychic strain. "I sense it too. Secondary presence. Not orc. Something else. Using the wah as cover, just as I foresaw in the warp. Brothers, we are not fighting one enemy. We fight two." "Elaborate," Titus demanded, parrying another strike from Gutsmasha's power claw while simultaneously shooting an orc knob that tried to interfere with the duel. Even in combat, the Space Marine captain processed tactical information like a supercomputer with guns. "Sentient corruption," Pythios said, and even through vox compression, the concern carried. "Hidden among the orcs, subtle, patient. This entire invasion, it's not random, it's orchestrated. The chaos god of change has agents here, using the orcs as unwitting pawns. They want us here. Want us committed. Want," reality hiccuped. Not metaphorically. Literally hiccuped, as if the universe briefly forgot how to physics and had to quickly remember before anyone noticed. The air above the command center tore open. Not a warp breach like they'd seen before, but something more surgical, more controlled. A portal edged in flames that burned in colors that hurt to perceive, and through it stepped figures in armor that made Tony's threat assessment explode into warnings. Chaos Space Marines. 1,000 Suns specifically. Traitor Astartes, who'd betrayed the Imperium 10,000 years ago, sworn themselves to Tzeentch, and spent the intervening millennia becoming sorcerers in power armor. Their armor was blue and gold, covered in arcane symbols that shifted when you weren't looking directly at them. They moved with the same enhanced capability as Loyalist Space Marines, but their presence twisted reality around them, making shadows fall in wrong directions and sounds echo before they were made. "Traitors!" Brother Marius roared, immediately redirecting fire toward the new threat. "Heretics! Oathbreakers!